They say every woman has a price, and in Copper Bend, Colorado, 1878, mine was $500 in gold. Standing on that auction platform with the autumn sun burning my shame into the dust, I heard men bidding for me like I was livestock. My father's gambling debts had finally caught up, and I was the payment. But then a stranger's voice cut through the crowd like a blade through silk. I'll pay it, every cent. I didn't know Jonas Keaton was about to change everything. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment which city you're watching from. I want to see how far our tale travels across this world. The morning my life was sold began like any other lie, with sunshine that promised hope while delivering only dust. I stood in the back room of Copper Bend's only bank, my hands trembling as I smoothed the wrinkles from my mother's wedding dress, now faded to the color of old parchment. Through the thin walls, I could hear Silas Boone's voice, sharp as a meat cleaver, laying out the terms of my father's spectacular failure. 3 years of unpaid loans, gentlemen, hotels in Denver, card games in Cheyenne, women in every mining camp from here to California. Boone's chair creaked. Thomas Harper's dead now, God rest his worthless soul, but the debt remains, $2,300 plus interest. I closed my eyes, my father's face swimming up from memory, handsome, charming, always one more scheme away from striking it rich. He died 3 weeks ago in a boarding house in Santa Fe, alone, broke, his liver finally giving out from all that rot-gut whiskey he'd loved more than his own daughter. The estate consists of 1 horse, lame, 1 pocket watch, broken, and 1 daughter. Boone paused for effect. Unspoiled, literate, decent enough to look at if you squint past the pride in her eyes. My stomach turned over. Through the crack in the door, I could see 4 men seated around Boone's mahogany desk, brought in special from Denver for this occasion. This wasn't a business meeting. This was a flesh market, and I was the merchandise. Now, gentlemen, Boone continued, his voice taking on the oily smoothness of a snake oil salesman, the law says I can't sell a white woman outright. This ain't the territories of old, but I can sell her father's debt, and whoever holds that debt, well, Miss Harper will be highly motivated to make arrangements for repayment, if you catch my meaning. Laughter, low and ugly, rippled through the room. Can she cook? One man asked. Can she work? Another added, his emphasis making his meaning crystal clear. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to bolt out the back door, steal a horse, ride until Colorado was just a bad memory. But where would I go? I had 17 cents to my name, no family, no friends willing to cross Silas Boone. The bastard owned half the town, and most of the other half owed him money. Let's bring her out, shall we? Boone's chair scraped against the floor. My heart hammered against my ribs like a bird trying to escape a cage. The door swung open, and Boone's pig-like eyes found me in the shadows. Miss Harper, if you please. I'd promised myself I wouldn't cry. I'd promised myself I'd keep my head high, maintain some scrap of dignity even as they stripped away everything else. But as I walked into that room, 4 pairs of eyes crawling over me like insects on carrion, I felt something inside me crack. The first man was elderly, 70 if he was a day, with liver-spotted hands and breath that rattled in his chest. The second was younger, maybe 40, but soft, the kind of softness that came from cruelty rather than kindness, his lips too wet, his eyes too eager. The third man made my skin crawl worst of all. Rail-thin with yellowed teeth and fingernails caked with grime, he stared at me like I was a Christmas feast and he hadn't eaten in months. When he smiled, I saw that 3 of his front teeth were missing. Turn around, girl, he said. I didn't move. Miss Harper, Boone's voice carried a warning edge. These gentlemen have traveled a long way. The least you can do is show them what they're bidding on. I'm a person, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Not a horse. You're a debt, Boone corrected. And until that debt is satisfied, you're whatever I say you are. The fourth man hadn't spoken yet. He sat in the corner, younger than the others, maybe 30, with sandy hair and nervous hands that kept adjusting his collar. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Gentlemen, shall we begin at 200? Boone asked. 200, the old man wheezed. 250, the soft one countered. 300, said the man with the yellow teeth. His name was Cyrus McComb, I'd learned, and he owned a pig farm 40 miles south of town. The smell of manure clung to him like a second skin. The bidding continued, each number driving another nail into the coffin of my future. 400, 450. When McComb bid 500, the others fell silent. Going once, Boone said, his eyes glittering with satisfaction. Going twice, 700. Every head in the room turned toward the door. He stood framed by sunlight, tall and broad-shouldered, with trail dust on his clothes and silver spurs that caught the light like stars. His face was weathered, tanned dark by years under the western sun, and his eyes, gray as a winter storm, swept the room with the kind of authority that made men straighten in their chairs without thinking. "I don't believe we've met," Boone said, his voice suddenly uncertain. "Jonas Keaton." The stranger stepped inside, his boots clicking against the wooden floor. "I ranch about 40 miles north, up in the high valley past Devil's Creek." "Mr. Keaton." Boone recovered his composure. "I wasn't aware you were interested in this particular opportunity." "I wasn't aware you were in the business of selling women, Boone." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Now see here," Boone blustered, "this is a legitimate transfer of debt. It's slavery with extra steps, and we both know it." Jonas's voice remained calm, but something dangerous flickered behind those gray eyes. 700. That's my bid. McComb shot to his feet. 800. 1,000, Jonas said, not even looking at the pig farmer. The room erupted into chaos. The old man started coughing. The soft one demanded to know who this interloper thought he was. McComb's face turned purple with rage. "You can't... This isn't..." Boone sputtered. $1,000 in gold, Jonas said, pulling a leather pouch from his coat and dropping it on the desk with a heavy thunk. "Count it. That should cover Harper's debt, plus whatever interest you've been compounding in that black little heart of yours." Boone's fingers trembled as he opened the pouch. Gold coins spilled across his desk, catching the lamplight, more money than I'd seen in my entire life. "This is highly irregular," Boone said, but his objections were weakening. Gold had a way of making men flexible with their principles. "The debt is paid," Jonas said. "In full. You got a problem with that, we can step outside and discuss it." The threat hung in the air, polite and lethal. Boone counted the coins twice, his lips moving silently. Finally he looked up, greed and anger warring on his face. "The debt is satisfied," he admitted. "Miss Harper, you're free to go with Mr. Keaton." "No." The word burst from my lips before I could stop it. Every eye turned to me. "I'm not going anywhere with anyone," I said, my voice shaking but growing stronger. "I didn't ask to be rescued. I didn't ask for any of this." Jonas looked at me for the first time, really looked at me, and something in his expression softened. "You're right," he said quietly. "You didn't. And I'm not here to buy you, Miss Harper. I'm here to buy your debt. There's a difference." "Is there?" I could hear the bitterness in my own voice. "Either way, I end up belonging to a man I've never met." "No." He shook his head. "Either way, you end up free. The debt's paid. You don't owe me a damn thing." The room went silent. "I don't understand," I whispered. Jonas picked up his hat from Boone's desk, brushing off the dust. "It's simple. Your father's debt is settled. You're free to do whatever you want. Stay here in Copper Bend, take a stage to Denver, homestead in Wyoming. It's your choice. But the money is mine to spend however I see fit. And I see fit to spend it making sure Cyrus McComb there doesn't get his filthy hands on a woman young enough to be his granddaughter." McComb lunged forward, but Jonas moved faster, his hand dropping to the gun at his hip. He didn't draw it, just let his palm rest on the grip, casual and threatening all at once. "I wouldn't," Jonas said softly. McComb froze, then spat on the floor and stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. The other bidders followed, muttering and shooting dark looks back at Jonas. Only Boone remained, clutching his gold like a drowning man clutching driftwood. "We're done here," Jonas said to the banker. "I'll take a receipt for the payment." While Boone scribbled out the paperwork, Jonas turned to me. "Miss Harper, I know this is a lot to take in. If you want to stay in town, I'll pay for a hotel room for the week, give you time to figure things out." If you want to leave, I'll pay your stage fare anywhere west of the Mississippi. And if you're interested—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "My ranch could use someone to help with the household management, cooking, cleaning, keeping the books. It's honest work, honest wages, and you'd have your own room, your own privacy. Two of my ranch hands, Miguel and Rafael, they're brothers, good men, married to sisters who live in town. You wouldn't be alone out there with just me, if that's what you're worried about." I stared at him, trying to understand. Men didn't do things like this. Men didn't throw away $1,000 on a stranger's freedom without expecting something in return. "Why?" I asked. "Why would you do this?" His jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "Because 10 years ago I was in a situation not too different from yours. Someone helped me when they didn't have to. I'm just passing it forward. Here." Boone shoved a piece of paper across the desk, his expression sour as vinegar. "Debt paid in full, signed and witnessed." Jonas folded it carefully and handed it to me. "This belongs to you." I took it with shaking hands, the paper feeling impossibly fragile, as if the slightest breeze might blow away my freedom. "I need time," I said. "To think." "Of course. I'm at the Silver Star Hotel, room 12. If you decide you want that job, meet me at the hotel tomorrow at dawn. If not—" he tipped his hat. "I wish you well, Miss Harper. Truly." Then he was gone, his boots echoing down the hallway, leaving me standing in Silas Boone's office holding a piece of paper that said I was free, but feeling more lost than I'd ever been in my life. I spent that afternoon walking the streets of Copper Bend, a ghost haunting the scenes of her former life. The dress shop where my mother used to buy her ribbons, closed now, the windows dark. The schoolhouse where I'd learned to read, now home to a saloon that opened at noon and never seemed to close. The church where my parents had married 26 years ago, still standing, but Father Morrison had died last winter, and the new minister was a fire and brimstone type who preached that poverty was God's punishment for sin. Maybe he was right. Maybe this was all punishment for my father's sins, or my own, or my mother's for dying and leaving me alone with a man who loved cards more than his own child. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, I found myself at the edge of town, staring out at the vast emptiness of the Colorado Territory. Somewhere out there, Jonas Keaton had a ranch. Somewhere out there was a life that didn't involve Silas Boone or Cyrus McComb or the pitying looks of townspeople who'd watched me grow up and done nothing to stop my father from drinking away our future. But somewhere out there also meant trusting a stranger. It meant putting my life in the hands of a man I'd met for all of 15 minutes. Then again, what choice did I have? Stay in Copper Bend and hope that Boone didn't find another creative way to own me? Take the stage to Denver with no money, no prospects, no references? At least Jonas Keaton had kind eyes. At least he'd given me a choice. Shut. I knocked on the door of room 12 at the Silver Star Hotel, just as the first light of dawn painted the sky pink and orange. My carpet bag, containing everything I owned in the world, felt impossibly heavy in my hand. The door opened almost immediately, as if Jonas had been awake, waiting. "Miss Harper?" He looked surprised to see me, which was oddly reassuring. If he'd been certain I'd come, that would have suggested an arrogance I couldn't trust. But this surprise, this hint of uncertainty in his eyes, made him seem more human, more real. "I'll take the job," I said, before I could lose my nerve. "If the offer still stands." "It does." He grabbed his own bag from inside the room. "I've got a wagon waiting at the livery. We can be to the ranch by noon if we don't dawdle." We walked through the empty streets together, our footsteps the only sound in the sleeping town. At the livery, a wagon stood ready, hitched to 2 sturdy horses. Jonas loaded our bags in the back with an efficiency that spoke of years doing such work. "You know how to ride?" he asked. "Some. My father taught me before—" I trailed off. "Before he got too fond of whiskey," Jonas finished, not unkindly. "Can you handle a wagon team?" "I think so." "Good. We'll trade off driving. It's a long haul and no sense in one of us getting too stiff." He helped me up onto the bench, a gesture of simple courtesy that somehow felt more intimate than it should. Then he climbed up beside me, took the reins, and clicked his tongue. The horses leaned into their harnesses, and just like that, we were leaving Copper Bend behind. For the first hour, neither of us spoke. The silence felt heavy, weighted with all the questions I wanted to ask, but didn't know how. Jonas seemed content with the quiet, his eyes on the road ahead, his hands steady on the reins. The landscape unfolded around us like a painting, rolling hills covered in prairie grass, stands of pine and aspen, distant mountains that seemed to touch the sky. I'd lived in Colorado my whole life, but I'd rarely left Copper Bend. Seeing all this space, all this beauty, I felt something in my chest loosen, just a little. "You asked me yesterday why I did it," Jonas said, suddenly, breaking the silence. "Why I paid your father's debt." I turned to look at him, but he kept his eyes on the road. 10 years ago, I was working on a cattle drive out of Texas. I was 19, stupid, thought I knew everything. We stopped in a town called Red River Station, and I got into a card game with some local men. He paused, adjusting his grip on the reins. Turned out they were cheating. When I called them on it, they didn't take kindly to the accusation, pulled knives, would have killed me right there in the saloon if an old-timer hadn't stepped in. What did he do? Paid them off. Bought my way out of the mess I'd gotten myself into. Cost him near about everything he had. Jonas finally looked at me. I asked him why, same as you asked me. Know what he said? What? He said, "Because someone has to be decent in this world, son. Might as well be me." Jonas's voice was soft with memory. I tried to pay him back, but he wouldn't hear of it. Said if I really wanted to square things, I should do the same for someone else someday. Help someone who needed it, no strings attached. And yesterday was that day, I said quietly. Yesterday was that day, he agreed. I'm not a saint, Miss Harper. I'm not even particularly good, but I'm trying to be decent. And selling women to pay their father's debts isn't decent, no matter how you dress it up in legal language. I thought about that for a long time, watching the scenery roll past. You can call me Evelyn, I said eventually. If we're going to be working together, Miss Harper seems a bit formal. The corner of his mouth quirked up. Jonas is fine for me. No Mr. Keaton needed. Jonas, I tested the name on my tongue. It felt strange, intimate in a way that made my heart skip. Can I ask you something? Shoot. Are you married? I should have asked before agreeing to come with you, but no, he said quickly. No, I'm not married. Never have been. Why not? You seem... I struggled for the right word. Stable, responsible. That's rare out here. He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I was engaged once. Girl named Sarah, back in Texas. Pretty as a picture, sweet as honey. We were going to get married, move west together, build a life. His jaw tightened. She died of cholera 3 days before the wedding. That was 11 years ago. I'm so sorry. It was a long time ago, but the pain in his voice said otherwise. After she died, I just kept moving. Worked cattle drives, saved my money, bought some land up in the high country. Built a house, raised some cattle, hired good men. But the idea of marriage, of opening myself up to that kind of loss again. He shook his head. Hasn't much appealed to me. I understood that. After watching my mother waste away from consumption, after seeing my father drink himself to death, I understood exactly how loss could hollow you out, make you afraid to care too deeply about anything. Thank you, I said, for telling me. Seems only fair. You're trusting me with a lot. You should know who I am. We rode in silence for another mile, but it felt different now. Less awkward, more companionable. The sun climbed higher, warming my face, and for the first time in months, I felt something that might have been hope stirring in my chest. Around mid-morning, Jonas pulled the wagon to a stop beside a creek. Let's rest the horses, he said, climbing down. You hungry? I realized I was starving. I hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. He pulled a wrapped bundle from under the wagon seat and handed it to me. Bread, cheese, some dried apples. Simple food, but it tasted like a feast. We sat on the creek bank, our feet dangling over the water, eating in comfortable silence. Tell me about the ranch, I said eventually. What's it like? Jonas's whole demeanor changed when he talked about his land. His voice softened, his eyes lit up, and I could see the love he had for that place in every word. It's a valley about 10 miles long, tucked up in the mountains. Got a creek running through it, good grass, shelter from the worst of the winter storms. The house isn't much, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a sitting room, but it's solid. I built it myself, every board and nail. He smiled, a real smile that transformed his weathered face. Got about 300 head of cattle, 2 dozen horses. Miguel and Rafael Ortega, they're my hands, brothers, good men. Their wives, Ana and Carmen, they live in town during the week with their kids, but they come up to the ranch on weekends sometimes. You'll like them. What do you do with the cattle? Beef. I drive them to market in Denver twice a year, spring and fall. It's not making me rich, but it's steady work, honest work. The land is paid for, the house is built, and I get to wake up every morning looking at mountains instead of people. That's worth more than money to me. The way he talked about it, I could almost see it. The valley, the creek, the mountains. It sounded like something out of a dream, the kind of place I used to imagine when I was a little girl, and my father still seemed like a hero. It sounds beautiful, I said. It is. He looked at me seriously. It's also isolated, Evelyn. The nearest town is Copper Bend, and we're 40 miles from there. Winters can be brutal. We sometimes go weeks without seeing anyone but each other and the Ortega brothers. If you're used to town life, to neighbors and socials and church on Sundays, it might feel lonely. I thought about Copper Bend, about the way people had looked at me after my father died, pity mixed with judgment. I thought about Silas Boone and Cyrus McComb and all the others who saw me as nothing more than a piece of property to be bought and sold. I think I can handle lonely, I said. Jonas was right. We reached the ranch by noon, though ranch felt like too grand a word for what I saw. The valley spread out before us, impossibly green against the brown hills surrounding it, with a creek cutting through the center like a silver ribbon. The house stood on a slight rise, whitewashed wood that gleamed in the sun, with a barn and several corrals nearby. Mountains rose up on all sides, snow-capped peaks that seemed to touch the clouds. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. 2 men emerged from the barn as we approached, the Ortega brothers, I assumed. They were both dark-haired and stocky, with the kind of weathered faces that spoke of years working outdoors. The taller one raised a hand in greeting. "Boss," he called, "we weren't expecting you back so soon." "Change of plans, Miguel," Jonas said, pulling the wagon to a stop. "Miguel, Rafael, this is Evelyn Harper. She'll be helping us keep this place running. Evelyn, these are the best ranch hands in Colorado." Miguel's eyes widened slightly, but he recovered quickly, tipping his hat to me. "Ma'am, welcome to Keaton Ranch, and—" "Thank you," I said, suddenly shy. Rafael, the younger brother, grinned. "Does this mean we'll finally get decent food around here? Jonas cooks like he's trying to poison us." "I've kept you alive this long, haven't I?" Jonas shot back, but there was warmth in his voice. The easy camaraderie between them made something in my chest ache. This was what family was supposed to look like. Not the bitter silence that had filled my father's house, but this gentle teasing, this obvious affection. Jonas helped me down from the wagon and carried my bag to the house. Inside it was simple but clean. Wooden floors, a stone fireplace, windows that let in the mountain light. He showed me to a small room at the back of the house, with a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the valley. "It's not much," he said, suddenly awkward. "But it's private. Door has a lock, and you're the only one with the key." He pulled a brass key from his pocket and held it out to me. I took it, the metal warm from his hand. "It's perfect. Kitchen's through there, sitting rooms to the left. My room is on the other side of the house, and there's a washroom between them. Miguel and Rafael bunk in the barn loft. They prefer it that way, say the house is too quiet." He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "The job is yours as long as you want it. Wages are $20 a month, paid on the 1st. If you ever want to leave, just say the word, and I'll take you wherever you want to go. No questions asked." "Jonas." I waited until he met my eyes. "Thank you for everything." He nodded once, then left, closing the door behind him. I sat on the bed, my carpet bag beside me, and looked around my new room. Sunlight streamed through the window, painting everything gold. From outside, I could hear Jonas talking to Miguel and Rafael, their voices carrying on the wind. Cattle lowed in the distance. A bird sang somewhere in the aspens. For the first time in 3 years, since my mother died and left me alone with my father's failures, I felt like I could breathe. The first week passed in a blur of learning the layout of the house, the rhythm of ranch life, the preferences of the men I was cooking for. Miguel liked his coffee black and strong enough to strip paint. Raphael had a sweet tooth and would eat an entire pie if you didn't watch him. Jonas ate whatever you put in front of him with the same quiet gratitude, never complained, always thanked me for the meal. The work was hard, harder than anything I'd done in Copper Bend. Up before dawn to get the coffee going and breakfast cooked. Cleaning, washing, mending clothes torn by barbed wire and rough work. Keeping the books, tracking expenses, managing supplies. By the time I fell into bed each night, I was too exhausted to think, which was a blessing. But slowly, day by day, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in years. Useful. Needed. Like I mattered. The second week, Ana and Carmen Ortega came up to the ranch with their children. 4 kids total, ranging from 5 to 12. They were warm, welcoming women who immediately pulled me into their circle, teaching me which herbs grew wild on the mountainside, showing me how to make tortillas from scratch, sharing stories and laughter. "Jonas is a good man," Ana told me one afternoon as we hung laundry on the line. "Quiet, sometimes too serious, but good. He paid for Miguel's wedding, you know. Wouldn't hear of accepting payment back. Said that's what friends do." I watched Jonas across the yard, teaching Anna's oldest son how to rope a fence post. The boy's lasso kept missing, but Jonas patiently retrieved it each time, adjusting the boy's grip, demonstrating again and again until the child finally got it right. The look of pure joy on that boy's face when the rope settled around the post made Jonas smile, a real, unguarded smile that transformed him. "He seems lonely," I said quietly. Anna looked at me with knowing eyes. "He is. Has been for a long time. Maybe that's changing now." I didn't ask what she meant. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. The third week, Jonas started teaching me to ride properly. Not the side saddle riding my mother had taught me, but real ranch riding, astride, with proper posture and control. "You need to be able to get help if something happens," he said as he saddled a gentle mare named Daisy. "If I'm out with the cattle and someone gets hurt, you need to be able to ride to town or find Miguel and Raphael." So every evening after supper, we'd ride out into the valley, Jonas patient as a saint while I learned to read the horse's movements, to anticipate, to work with the animal instead of against it. Sometimes we'd stop by the creek and let the horses drink while we watched the sun set over the mountains. Those were my favorite times, the quiet moments when the day's work was done and the world seemed to hold its breath. Jonas would talk sometimes, telling me stories about the land, pointing out where he'd seen a cougar last winter or where lightning had struck a tree. Other times we'd just sit in silence, watching the light change, and that was good too. I was happy. The realization came to me one evening as we rode back toward the ranch, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. I was genuinely deeply happy in a way I couldn't remember being since before my mother got sick. And that terrified me. Because happiness, in my experience, was always temporary. It was always taken away, usually when you least expected it. My mother had been happy before the consumption hollowed her out. My father had been happy before the gambling took hold. I'd been happy once, a lifetime ago, before I learned that everything good turns to ash eventually. But that night, as I unsaddled Daisy and brushed her down, listening to Jonas joke with Raphael in the barn, I let myself believe, just for a moment, that maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time, happiness would stay. But happiness, like spring in the mountains, proved fragile. It started with small things I didn't notice at first. Jonas riding the fence lines more often than necessary. Miguel and Raphael exchanging worried glances when they thought I wasn't looking. The way Jonas would stand on the porch at night, staring down the valley road as if expecting trouble. 4 weeks after I'd arrived at the ranch, I found out why. I was in the kitchen preparing supper, flour dusting my hands as I rolled out biscuit dough, when I heard horses approaching. Not the familiar sound of Jonas and the Ortega brothers returning from work, but multiple riders moving fast. Through the window, I saw Jonas emerge from the barn, his hand already on his gun. 5 men rode into the yard, and even from a distance, I could see they weren't friendly visitors. The leader was a man I'd never seen before, tall, rail-thin, with a scar cutting down his left cheek like a knife wound. He wore a tin star on his vest, but there was nothing lawful in the way he sat his horse, slouched and arrogant. "Jonas Keaton," the man called out. "Been a while." "Not long enough, Garrett," Jonas's voice carried through the open window, cold as January ice. "What do you want?" Now that's no way to greet the law. Deputy Garrett, if that's what he really was, smiled, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "I'm here on official business." "Since when does official business require 5 armed men?" "Since we're tracking a fugitive. Woman ran off from her lawful obligations down in Copper Bend. Silas Boone says she owes him money, and the law says we got a right to bring her back." My blood turned to ice water. The rolling pin slipped from my hands and clattered on the table. "Evelyn Harper's debts were paid in full," Jonas said, his voice deadly quiet. "I've got the receipt signed by Boone himself." "See, that's where it gets complicated." Garrett shifted in his saddle, and I saw his hand drift toward his gun. "Boone says you paid the original debt, sure enough. But Miss Harper incurred additional debts afterward, room and board at the hotel, supplies from the general store. Comes to another $300. Since she left town without settling up, that makes her a debtor in flight. We're authorized to bring her back to face her obligations." It was a lie. I'd stayed at the hotel one night, paid for by Jonas. I'd bought nothing from the general store. But from the way Garrett smiled, from the way his men fanned out to surround the house, I knew the truth didn't matter. Boone wanted revenge, and he'd found men willing to deliver it. Miguel and Rafael had emerged from the barn, positioning themselves on either side of Jonas. 3 men against 5, and me standing in the kitchen like a deer frozen by torchlight. "She's not going anywhere," Jonas said. "Now, Keaton, you don't want to obstruct justice. This isn't justice. This is Silas Boone buying himself a badge and calling it law." Jonas took a step forward. "You rode 40 miles for nothing. Turn around and ride back, or we're going to have a problem." Garrett's smile vanished. "You threatening me?" "I'm telling you how it is. Evelyn Harper is under my protection. Anyone wants to take her, they go through me first." For a long moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the wind rustling through the aspens and my own heart hammering against my ribs. I should run, I thought. I should get on a horse and run until Colorado was a memory, but my legs wouldn't move. "You're making a mistake, Keaton," Garrett said finally. "But I'm a patient man. I'll be back with a proper warrant and more men. And when I do, you won't have a choice." He wheeled his horse around, and his men followed. They rode back down the valley road, 5 dark shapes against the sunset, and I knew this wasn't over. It had only just begun. Jonas stood in the yard for a long time after they left, his hand still on his gun. Miguel said something to him in Spanish, too low for me to hear. Rafael shook his head and headed back to the barn. When Jonas finally came inside, his face was carved from stone. "I'm sorry," I said, the words tumbling out. "I didn't know. I never bought anything." "I know." He pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. "This isn't your fault, Evelyn. It's Boone's. He's angry I made him look bad in front of those bidders, angry he lost out on a profit. So he's using what law there is out here to get what he wants." "What do we do?" Jonas was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the table. "Tomorrow, I'm riding to Copper Bend to see Judge Morrison. He's the only honest lawman within 100 miles. If I can get him to issue a statement that your debts are satisfied, that might stop this before it goes any further." "And if it doesn't?" He met my eyes, and what I saw there made my stomach clench. "Then we deal with it when it comes." That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed listening to the house creak and settle, imagining every sound was riders coming back. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway, Jonas pacing. I got up and found him in the kitchen, staring out the window at the darkness. "You should be asleep," he said without turning around. "So should you." He smiled grimly. "Sleep's overrated." I moved to stand beside him, and for a while we both stared out at the night. The moon was nearly full, painting the valley in shades of silver and shadow. It was beautiful and terrible at once, this wild country that gave with one hand and took with the other. "Why are you doing this?" I asked quietly. "You could tell them to take me. You could wash your hands of this whole mess. Instead, you're risking everything, your ranch, your life, for someone you barely know." Jonas turned to look at me, and in the moonlight, his face seemed younger, more vulnerable. You remember what I told you about the man who saved me in Red River Station? He said someone has to be decent. He said something else, too, something I didn't tell you before. Jonas's voice dropped to almost a whisper. He said, "The measure of a man isn't what he does when people are watching. It's what he does when he's the only one who'll ever know. Nobody would blame me for letting Garrett take you. It would be the smart thing, the safe thing, but I'd know. For the rest of my life, I'd know I stood by and let an innocent woman be dragged back into slavery because it was easier than fighting. I'm not worth dying for," I said. "That's not your call to make." His hand found mine in the darkness, and I felt the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers. Besides, I'm not planning on dying. I'm planning on Judge Morrison doing his job and putting an end to this circus. But his hand trembled slightly in mine, and I knew he wasn't as confident as he pretended. Jonas left at dawn, riding hard for Copper Bend with a leather satchel containing every piece of paperwork related to my father's debt. Miguel and Raphael stayed behind, ostensibly to work the cattle, but I noticed they kept their rifles close and their eyes on the valley road. The day crawled by like a wounded animal. I tried to stay busy, washing, mending, cooking, but my hands shook so badly I burned the biscuits and dropped a cup, shattering it on the floor. Around noon, Raphael came in and found me sweeping up the shards, tears streaming down my face. "Hey, hey," he said gently, taking the broom from my hands. "It's just a cup." "It's not the cup." I wiped my eyes angrily. "It's everything. Jonas shouldn't have to do this. You and Miguel shouldn't have to stand guard like we're under siege. This is my mess, and everyone else is paying for it." Raphael guided me to a chair and sat down across from me. He was the younger brother, 23 to Miguel's 28, with an easy smile and a gentle way about him that reminded me of my mother. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. "When Miguel and I first came to work for Jonas, we were in bad shape. Our father had died, left us with nothing but debts. We were about to lose our family's land in New Mexico. Jonas heard about it somehow, I still don't know how, and he showed up with enough money to pay off everything. Didn't ask for repayment, didn't want anything in return. Just said he knew what it was like to be desperate and wanted to help. I didn't know that. Most people don't. Jonas doesn't talk about the things he does for people, but I'm telling you because you need to understand. This is who he is. Helping you isn't a burden to him. It's who he'd be whether you were here or not." I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe I wasn't just another problem in Jonas Keaton's life. But doubt had lived in my heart for so long, it was hard to evict. Miguel came in as the sun was setting, his face troubled. "Riders coming, 3 of them." My heart stopped. "Is it Jonas?" "Can't tell yet. Raphael, get your rifle. Evelyn, get in your room and lock the door." "No." I stood up, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. "If this is about me, I'm not hiding." Miguel started to argue, but footsteps on the porch cut him off. A knock, 3 sharp raps. "It's me," Jonas called. "Let me in." Relief flooded through me as Miguel opened the door. Jonas stepped inside, trail dust covering him from hat to boots, exhaustion carved into every line of his face. But it was the 2 people behind him that made me gasp. The first was an elderly man in a black suit with snow-white hair and eyes sharp as a hawk's. Judge Morrison, I assumed. The second was a young man, maybe 25, with sandy hair and blue eyes, and a face I'd seen every day for the first 18 years of my life. "Cal?" I whispered. My brother stood in the doorway of Jonas's ranch house, and for a moment I thought I was dreaming. Cal Harper, who'd left home 6 years ago to try his luck in the California goldfields. Cal, who'd written faithfully for the first 2 years, then less and less, until the letters stopped altogether. Cal, who I'd assumed was dead, or had simply forgotten about the sister he'd left behind. "Evie." His voice broke on my name, and then I was running, and he was catching me, lifting me off my feet the way he used to when I was small. "God, Evie, I thought I'd lost you." I was crying, unable to speak, holding on to him like he might disappear if I let go. Over his shoulder I saw Jonas watching us with something soft in his eyes, and I realized he'd gone looking for my brother. Somehow, Jonas had found Cal and brought him here. When I could finally speak, the words came out in a rush. "Where have you been? Why did you stop writing? Did you know about Father?" I know everything. Cal set me down, his hands on my shoulders. Let me explain, but first, he turned to Jonas and Judge Morrison. Thank you, both of you. I don't know how to repay. You can repay me by telling your sister what you told me, Jonas said. She deserves to hear it. We sat around the kitchen table, me, Cal, Jonas, the Ortega brothers, and Judge Morrison. I made coffee with shaking hands while Cal gathered his thoughts. I left for California because Father was getting worse, Cal began, his voice heavy with old guilt. The drinking, the gambling. I couldn't watch it anymore. I thought if I could strike gold, make enough money, I could come back and save you both. But the gold fields, he shook his head, they eat men alive. I spent 3 years breaking my back for nothing, living in camps where men killed each other over imagined slights. I wrote when I could, but mail is unreliable out there. Half the letters never made it through. What happened? I asked. Why did you stop writing altogether? A mine collapsed, buried 16 men, including the fellow who had my last letter to you in his coat pocket. Cal's voice went flat. I was supposed to be in that tunnel. Should have been. But I'd stayed topside to fix some equipment. After that, I couldn't write and tell you I was alive when good men weren't. Felt wrong somehow. Felt like I'd used up all my luck and didn't deserve any more. So what changed? Jonas asked quietly. I finally struck a small vein of silver last spring. Not enough to make me rich, but enough to come home. Cal looked at me, his eyes haunted. I rode straight to Copper Bend, arrived about 3 weeks ago. Found Father's grave. Found out what Boone had tried to do to you. His hands clenched into fists on the table. I went to the banker, demanded to know where you were. He said you'd run off with some rancher, implied things I won't repeat. I was about to beat the truth out of him when Jonas here showed up at the bank. Jonas picked up the story. I went to see Judge Morrison this morning, explained the situation. The judge confirmed that your debts were paid in full, that Garrett's warrant was worthless paper. While I was there, your brother came storming into the courthouse looking for you. Didn't take long to put the pieces together. Judge Morrison cleared his throat. Miss Harper, I want to assure you that Deputy Garrett was acting without proper authority. I've issued a written statement to that effect and sent a telegram to the territorial marshal. Garrett and his men won't trouble you again. But Silas Boone is a banker, not a lawmaker, the judge said firmly. He's also a fool who just attempted to orchestrate kidnapping under color of law. I've informed him that any further harassment of you or Mr. Keaton will result in criminal charges. The man may be wealthy, but even he can't buy his way out of territorial prison. I couldn't quite believe it. After weeks of fear, after yesterday's terror, it was just over? It's really over? I whispered. It's really over, Jonas confirmed. The relief hit me like a physical blow. I put my head down on the table and sobbed, great gasping sobs that I couldn't control. Cal's hand found my shoulder, steady and warm. When I finally looked up, everyone was looking away, giving me the privacy to fall apart, except Jonas. He met my eyes across the table, and I saw understanding there. He knew what it was like to carry fear for so long that relief felt like drowning. Thank you, I managed. All of you. I don't know how to... You don't have to thank us, Judge Morrison said kindly. You did nothing wrong, child. The shame belongs to those who tried to victimize you. After the judge left, riding back to Copper Bend with Miguel as an escort, Cal, Jonas, Raphael, and I stayed up late into the night talking. Cal told stories of California, of the hard men and harder work, of the strange beauty of the Pacific coast. I told him about Mother's last days, about Father's decline, about the auction that had nearly destroyed me. Jonas said little, but I could feel him listening, absorbing every word. Around midnight, Raphael excused himself to get some sleep. Cal began to nod off in his chair, exhausted from hard writing. There's a spare bunk in the barn loft, Jonas offered. Not much, but it's dry and warm. Cal stood, swaying slightly. I'd sleep on rocks and call it luxury after some of the places I've been. He turned to me, pulling me into a fierce hug. I'm not leaving again, Evie, not ever. I'm staying right here in Colorado, close enough to see you whenever I want. You can stay here, I said impulsively, then looked at Jonas. If that's all right? Jonas nodded. Always use another good hand on a ranch. If Cal wants work, it's his. My brother's eyes went bright. I'd be honored. After Cal stumbled off to the barn, Jonas and I were alone in the kitchen. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock and the wind outside. I should have gone to bed. I should have let the exhaustion pull me under, but I couldn't seem to move. You found him, I said softly. You went to Copper Bend to see the judge, but you also went looking for my brother. Seemed like the thing to do. Jonas stood and began banking the fire in the stove. I remembered you mentioning once that he'd gone to California. Asked around town, found out he'd been back for a few weeks, staying at the boarding house. Tracked him down and explained the situation. You didn't have to do that. I know. He straightened, firelight casting shadows across his face. But I wanted to. You deserve to have family beside you. Something in the way he said it made my breath catch. In the flickering light, with his guard down, Jonas looked almost vulnerable. And I realized, with a clarity that shocked me, that somewhere along the way, between the biscuits and the riding lessons and the quiet evenings watching the sunset, I'd stopped seeing him as just my employer. I'd started seeing him as something more. The realization terrified me. I wasn't supposed to feel this way. I'd come here for safety, for honest work, not to develop feelings for a man who'd made it clear he wasn't interested in marriage, in opening himself up to loss again. Good night, Jonas, I said quickly, too quickly. Thank you for everything, you. I fled to my room before he could answer, before the emotions swirling in my chest could betray themselves on my face. But as I lay in bed that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the way his hand had trembled in mine the night before, about the softness in his eyes when Cal and I reunited, about the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him like heat from a fire. I was falling for Jonas Keaton, and I had no idea what to do about it. The next few days settled into a new rhythm. Cal proved to be a natural with horses and cattle, picking up ranch work as if he'd been born to it. He and the Ortega brothers became fast friends, their laughter often echoing across the valley. Having my brother close felt like getting back a piece of myself I'd thought lost forever. But it also complicated things. Because Cal, protective as always, had noticed the way I looked at Jonas. And he had opinions. He's a good man, Cal said one afternoon as we walked along the creek, ostensibly checking for beaver dams, but really just talking. But Evie, you need to be careful. Careful of what? Of getting too attached. Jonas Keaton is married to this ranch. I've seen the way he works, sunrise to sunset, every day, never taking time for anything but the land and the cattle. There's no room in that life for romance. I'm not looking for romance, I lied. Cal gave me the same look he used to give me when I was 10 and claiming I hadn't stolen cookies from the jar. I've seen the way you watch him, and I've seen the way he watches you when he thinks nobody's looking. But watching doesn't mean he'll act on it. From what I've heard, he lost someone once, and it broke something in him. I know about Sarah. Then you know why I'm worried. Cal stopped walking and turned to face me. I just got you back, Evie. I don't want to see you hurt. I can take care of myself. I know you can, but hearts don't always listen to sense. He was right, of course. Hearts were foolish, reckless things that leaped without looking and paid the price later. Mine had already jumped off the cliff. It was just a matter of time before it hit the ground. A week after Judge Morrison's visit, Ana and Carmen Ortega came to the ranch with news that set the valley buzzing with excitement. There was to be a barn dance in Copper Bend, a celebration of the fall harvest. Everyone from 50 miles around would be there, with music and food and dancing until dawn. You must come, Ana insisted, grabbing my hands. All of you. It's been too long since we had something to celebrate. Miguel and Rafael were immediately enthusiastic. Cal grinned and said it sounded like a fine time. But Jonas hesitated. I don't much care for town gatherings, he said. Oh, come on, boss, Rafael wheedled. When's the last time you did something besides work? You're going to turn into a fence post if you're not careful. He's right, Cal added. Besides, if Evelyn goes, she should have proper escort. Can't have her fending off every unmarried man in the territory on her own. Something flickered across Jonas's face, an emotion I couldn't quite name. Fine, he said abruptly. We'll go, but I'm not dancing. Anna and Carmen exchanged knowing smiles that made my cheeks burn. The night of the dance, I put on my mother's dress, the good one, dark blue with lace at the collar, that I'd been saving for a special occasion that never seemed to come. I'd washed and curled my hair, pinched my cheeks for color, and even borrowed a bit of Carmen's rose water perfume. Standing in front of the small mirror in my room, I barely recognized myself. When I emerged from my room, I found Cal, Miguel, and Rafael already waiting by the wagon, scrubbed clean and dressed in their best. But it was Jonas who made my breath catch. He'd traded his usual work clothes for a crisp white shirt and black vest, his hair still damp from washing, his jaw freshly shaved. He looked up as I approached, and for just a moment everything else fell away. There was only him and me and the way his eyes widened slightly, taking me in. "You look," he started, then seemed to lose the words. "Different?" I supplied, suddenly self-conscious. "Beautiful," he finished quietly. The word hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. Cal cleared his throat loudly, breaking the spell. "We should get going," my brother said. "Don't want to miss the start." The ride to Copper Bend felt longer than usual, or maybe I was just hyper-aware of Jonas sitting beside me on the wagon bench, his shoulder occasionally brushing mine as we hit ruts in the road. Neither of us spoke much, but the silence thrummed with unspoken things. The barn at the edge of town had been transformed. Lanterns hung from its rafters, casting warm light over the crowd already gathering. A group of musicians, 2 fiddles, a guitar, and a man with a harmonica, were tuning up in the corner. Tables laden with food lined one wall, and the air smelled of fresh bread and roasted meat and possibility. As soon as we arrived, Rafael swept Carmen into the dancing. Cal disappeared to greet old friends, and Miguel went to help Anna with the food. That left Jonas and me standing at the edge of the crowd, watching the festivities unfold around us. "You promised you'd dance," I reminded him. "I said I'd come to the dance. I made no promises about actual dancing." "That's a technicality." "It's the truth." But there was a hint of humor in his voice. We stood together in companionable silence, watching the dancers spin and laugh. It was beautiful, the way they moved together, the joy on their faces. But I was acutely aware of every breath Jonas took beside me, every small movement, every time his hand almost brushed mine. "Miss Harper." I turned to find a young man approaching, tall, fair-haired, maybe 19. It took me a moment to place him. Thomas Whitmore, the son of the general store owner who used to pull my braids when we were children. "Tom," I said, surprised. "I didn't know you were back from Denver." "Just got in yesterday. Ma wrote and told me about the dance." He smiled broadly. "Would you do me the honor of a dance?" I hesitated, glancing at Jonas. His face had gone carefully blank, unreadable. "Go ahead," he said. "I'll be fine here." So I let Tom lead me onto the dance floor, joining the swirl of couples moving to a lively reel. Tom was a good dancer, light on his feet, keeping up an easy stream of conversation about his studies in Denver. But I couldn't stop myself from glancing over at Jonas, still standing alone at the edge of the barn, his eyes following me across the floor. When the song ended, another young man asked for the next dance, then another. It seemed every unmarried man in the county wanted a turn, and I couldn't politely refuse them all. After the 5th dance, I pleaded exhaustion and escaped to get some punch. Jonas was gone. I found him outside, leaning against the barn wall, looking up at the stars. The sounds of music and laughter spilled out through the open door, but out here it was quieter, cooler. "Running away?" I asked, approaching slowly. "Taking a break from all the excitement." He didn't look at me, just kept staring at the sky. "You're popular tonight." "They're just being polite." "They're being interested. There's a difference." Something in his tone made my pulse quicken. I moved to stand beside him, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Are you jealous, Jonas Keaton?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light, even as my heart raced. That made him look at me. In the moonlight, his eyes were dark, intense. Would it matter if I was? The question stole my breath. We stood there, frozen, the moment stretching between us like a rope pulled tight. Inside, the musicians started a slow waltz, the melody drifting out into the night. "Dance with me," I said impulsively. "Just one dance, please." Evelyn, I've danced with half a dozen men tonight, but the only one I want to dance with is you. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he pushed off from the wall and offered me his hand. I took it, and he pulled me close, closer than was strictly proper, his hand at my waist, my hand on his shoulder. We began to move, swaying to the music, and the rest of the world fell away. "I'm not good at this," he murmured, his breath warm against my temple. "You're doing fine." "I don't mean the dancing." I leaned back enough to look up at him. "What do you mean?" His jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, feelings. Letting myself feel things for people. I told myself after Sarah died that I wouldn't do this again, wouldn't open myself up to caring because caring means loss, and I'd rather be alone than destroyed. "Jonas, but then you showed up on that auction block, and something in me broke. Or maybe it healed. I don't know anymore." His hand tightened on my waist. "What I do know is that every time I see you smile, every time you laugh at something Raphael says or hum while you're cooking, every damn time you walk into a room, I feel it. And it terrifies me, Evelyn, because I know how this story ends. People leave, people die, and I'm not sure I could survive losing someone again." Tears pricked at my eyes. "What if you don't lose them? What if this time it's different? How can I trust that?" "You can't," I whispered. "That's what faith is, believing anyway." The music swelled around us, and we kept dancing, holding on to each other like we might drown if we let go. When the song ended, we stood there in the darkness outside the barn, and I realized Cal was right. I'd fallen completely, irrevocably in love with Jonas Keaton. And from the look in his eyes, I wasn't alone in that fall. But before either of us could speak, Cal's voice shattered the moment like a stone through glass. "Evie! Jonas!" He burst through the barn door, his face pale in the lamplight spilling from behind him. "We've got trouble." Jonas's hand dropped from my waist instantly, his whole body shifting into alertness. "What kind of trouble?" "Deputy Garrett just rode in with 8 men. They're asking for you, boss, and they're armed to the teeth." My blood turned cold. "But Judge Morrison said—" "I don't think Garrett gives a damn what the judge said." Cal grabbed my arm. "Come on. We need to get you out of here." But it was too late. The music inside the barn had stopped, replaced by the sound of boots on wooden floors and worried murmurs. Through the open door, I could see the crowd parting as Garrett and his men pushed through, their hands on their guns, their faces hard as flint. "There you are, Keaton," Garrett's voice carried across the sudden silence. "Been looking for you." Jonas stepped in front of me, his body a shield. "I thought we settled this, Garrett. Judge Morrison made it clear." "Judge Morrison's an old fool living in the past." Garrett spat tobacco juice on the clean barn floor, making several women gasp in outrage. "New territorial governor just got appointed, and he's bringing new rules. Seems Silas Boone has friends in high places, friends who don't appreciate vigilante ranchers interfering with legal debt collection." "Legal?" Miguel appeared at Jonas's side, Raphael flanking his other side, Cal moving to stand with them. "There's nothing legal about what you're doing." "That's where you're wrong, boy." Garrett pulled a folded paper from his vest. "This here's a writ of attachment signed by the new territorial secretary himself. Miss Evelyn Harper is to be remanded into custody pending resolution of her outstanding debts. Anyone interfering with the execution of this writ will be charged with obstruction and conspiracy." The paper might as well have been a death warrant. I felt the weight of every eye in the barn turning toward me, some sympathetic, others calculating. The good people of Copper Bend might not like Silas Boone, but they liked bucking territorial authority even less. "Let me see that." Jonas held out his hand. Garrett smirked and handed over the writ. Jonas read it carefully, his face growing darker with each line. Finally, he looked up, and what I saw in his eyes made my stomach drop. "This is legitimate," he said quietly. "Signed and sealed 3 days ago in Denver." "Told you." Garrett's smile was a slash of yellow teeth. "Now, Miss Harper, you can come peaceful-like, or we can do this the hard way. Your choice." "She's not going anywhere." Jonas's voice was steel-wrapped in velvet. "This writ gives you authority to collect a debt, not to arrest her. If Boone wants his money, I'll pay it. Right here, right now." "Already paid once, Keaton. How many times you planning to buy this girl?" The crude implication hung in the air, ugly and deliberate. I felt my face burn with shame, but Jonas didn't flinch. I'm planning to pay as many times as it takes to keep her out of Boone's hands. Name your price. Garrett's smile widened. Can't. This writ requires her presence in Copper Bend for a formal accounting of debts. Could be 300, could be 3,000. Won't know until we get her back to town and Boone tallies everything up. It was a trap, and we all knew it. Boone would keep inventing debts, keep dragging this out, until either Jonas ran out of money or something worse happened. Then I'll come to town with her, Jonas said. I'll stand witness to this accounting. Writ says I take her into custody. Doesn't say anything about tagalongs. Garrett jerked his chin at his men. Boys, collect the lady. 3 of Garrett's men started forward. Miguel and Rafael moved to intercept them, hands dropping to their guns. The barn erupted into chaos, women screaming, men shouting, everyone scrambling to get away from what was about to become a bloodbath. Stop! The voice that rang out wasn't mine, wasn't Jonas's, wasn't any voice I expected. It was Tom Whitmore's father, stepping out from the crowd. Henry Whitmore was a portly man with mutton chop whiskers and a reputation for being careful with both his money and his words. But now he stood between Garrett's men and us, his face red with anger. You come into my town, into our celebration, and threaten our people? Henry's voice shook with rage. I don't care what paper you're waving around, deputy. This is wrong, and everyone here knows it. Get out of the way, old man, Garrett snarled. No. Henry planted his feet. And I'm not alone in that sentiment. Is this how we do things now? Allow men like Silas Boone to use territorial authority to settle personal vendettas? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. I saw other men stepping forward, the blacksmith, the hotel owner, even old Father Morrison's replacement, a young priest named Father Daniels. Mr. Garrett, Father Daniels said, his voice calm but firm. I think you'll find that the people of Copper Bend are not as easily intimidated as you might believe. Miss Harper has committed no crime. Her debts, if they truly exist, are a civil matter, not a criminal one. Taking her by force makes you no better than a kidnapper. This is territorial business, Garrett growled, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. He hadn't expected resistance from the townspeople. Then let it be handled through proper territorial channels, Henry said. Let Miss Harper and Mr. Keaton travel to Denver. Present their case before the territorial court. If she owes money, she can pay it. If she doesn't, then this harassment ends. That's exactly how it works, interrupted a new voice from the back of the barn. The crowd parted again and Judge Morrison walked through, leaning on a cane but with his spine straight as an iron rod. I may be old, Garrett, but I'm not dead, and I'm still a territorial judge. This writ you're waving around is valid in letter, but corrupt in spirit. Any fool can see that. Judge Morrison, Garrett's voice took on a cajoling tone. Sir, with all respect, this matter has been elevated above your jurisdiction. Nothing in this territory is above my jurisdiction until I say it is. The judge's eyes were hard as agates. I'm issuing a counter order. Miss Harper will remain free pending a formal hearing in territorial court. I'll send a telegram to Denver first thing tomorrow morning, request an expedited hearing. Until then, anyone attempting to take her into custody will answer to me. You can't do that, Garrett protested, but his voice lacked conviction. I just did. Now get out of my town before I charge you with disturbing the peace. For a long moment, Garrett stood frozen, his hand on his gun, his face twisted with fury. His men looked to him for guidance, clearly uncertain about firing on a crowd that included women and children. Finally, with a curse, Garrett spun on his heel. This isn't over, Keaton, he spat, not by a long shot. They left in a thunder of hoofbeats, and the barn erupted into relieved chatter. People crowded around us. Henry Whitmore shaking Jonas's hand, Father Daniels offering prayers, women hugging me and promising their support. But through it all, I felt numb, disconnected, as if I were watching it all happen to someone else. Judge Morrison pulled Jonas and me aside into a quiet corner. That bought us some time, the judge said quietly. But not much. Garrett was right about one thing. The new territorial administration is corrupt as a rotten tooth. They've sold favors to every wealthy man in Colorado, and Boone's near the top of that list. When this goes to court in Denver, you'll need more than truth on your side. You'll need proof, documentation, witnesses. I have receipts, Jonas said. Proof that I paid Harper's original debts in full. That's a start, but it won't be enough. Boone will claim new debts, fabricate records, buy testimony from anyone willing to lie for money. The judge sighed heavily. You need to find people who'll speak against Boone, expose his corruption. It won't be easy. He's got half the territory under his thumb. Then we'll find the other half, I said, surprised by the strength in my own voice. There have to be others he's hurt, other people who'd testify if they knew they weren't alone. Judge Morrison looked at me with something like respect. You're brave, child, but bravery doesn't always win the day. Maybe not, Jonas said, his hand finding mine. But it's a damn good start. We rode back to the ranch in silence, the wagon full of people but empty of words. Cal sat in the back with Miguel and Rafael, all three men armed and alert, watching the darkness for threats. Jonas drove, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning the road ahead. And I sat beside him, trying not to think about what might happen in Denver, trying not to imagine being dragged back to Copper Bend in chains. When we finally reached the ranch, everyone was too keyed up to sleep. We gathered in the kitchen, and Jonas pulled out a bottle of whiskey he kept for medicinal purposes. Even I took a sip, choking on the burn but grateful for the warmth that spread through my chest. We need a plan, Cal said, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. We can't just wait for this hearing and hope for the best. The judge is right, Miguel agreed. We need evidence, witnesses. People who've been hurt by Boone and are willing to say so publicly. I know someone, Rafael said slowly. Remember Diego Martinez? Used to own the saddle shop in Copper Bend before it burned down last year? The fire that Boone blamed on faulty lamp oil? Jonas asked. That's the one. Except Diego swore it wasn't an accident, swore someone said it deliberately after he refused to sell his property to Boone for pennies on the dollar. Nobody believed him, figured he was just looking for someone to blame for his bad luck. Where is he now? I asked. Working at a tannery in Pueblo. Bitter as hell about what happened, but scared to speak up. If we could convince him? It's not enough, Jonas interrupted. One man's testimony against Boone's money and influence? We need more. We talked long into the night, making lists of people who might help, people who'd suffered under Boone's schemes. The more we talked, the clearer it became just how deeply the banker's corruption ran. He'd foreclosed on properties under questionable circumstances, called in loans early when people couldn't pay, charged interest rates that bordered on usury. But he'd been careful, always working within the letter of the law, if not its spirit, and people were too afraid of his power to challenge him. As dawn began to paint the sky pink and gold, Cal finally voiced what we were all thinking. What if we can't find enough evidence? What if Boone's bought enough people that the truth doesn't matter? Nobody answered. The question hung in the air, heavy and terrible. Finally, Jonas stood, his chair scraping against the floor. Then we deal with that when it comes. For now, we work with what we have. He looked at each of us in turn. Miguel, Rafael, tomorrow you two start riding to neighboring ranches, talk to people, see who might be willing to speak up. Cal, you go to Pueblo, find Martinez and anyone else who's got a grievance. I'll stay here with Evelyn and go through every scrap of paper I have, build a timeline of payments and receipts. What about me? I asked. What can I do? Jonas met my eyes, and something in his expression made my breath catch. You survive this. That's what you do. You keep being brave, keep being strong, and you survive. The words felt like a promise and a prayer all at once. After the others finally went to catch a few hours of sleep, Jonas and I remained in the kitchen, surrounded by papers and empty coffee cups. The sun was fully up now, streaming through the windows, painting everything in shades of gold. I'm sorry, Jonas said quietly, not looking at me. I thought paying your father's debts would end this. I never imagined Boone would be so vindictive, would twist the law itself to get revenge. This isn't your fault, isn't it? If I just let things be, let you handle it your own way, I'd be in Cyrus McComb's pig farm right now if I was lucky. I reached across the table and took his hand. You saved me, Jonas. Whatever happens in Denver, whatever Boone tries to do, that doesn't change. He looked down at our joined hands, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. When I saw Garrett's men moving toward you in that barn, when I thought they might take you away, His voice went rough. I realized something. This isn't about doing the decent thing anymore. This isn't about paying forward some old debt or being a good man. What is it about? He raised his eyes to mine, and what I saw there made my heart stop and race all at once. It's about you. It's about the fact that somewhere between the auction block and tonight, I fell in love with you, Evelyn Harper. And I'm not letting anyone take you away from me. Not Garrett, not Boone, not the whole damn territorial government. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at him as his words washed over me like a wave. I know the timing is terrible, he continued, a rueful smile touching his lips. I know we're in the middle of a crisis, and this is probably the last thing you need to hear right now. But I watched you dance with all those men tonight, and I realized I couldn't keep pretending I didn't feel this way. Life's too short and too uncertain to waste time lying to ourselves. Jonas. His name came out as barely more than a whisper. I love you too. I think I've loved you since that day you paid my debt and told me I was free. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after a long night. He stood, pulled me to my feet, and for a moment we just looked at each other, the kitchen full of golden light and possibility. Then he cupped my face in his hands, his touch gentle as if I might break, and kissed me. It was nothing like the kisses in the romantic novels my mother used to read. It was better, real and warm and tasting faintly of coffee and hope. His arms came around me, pulling me close, and I wrapped my arms around his neck, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a spinning world. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jonas rested his forehead against mine. Whatever happens in Denver, he said quietly, whatever we have to face, we face it together. You're not alone anymore, Evelyn. Not ever again. Together, I agreed and sealed it with another kiss. A polite cough from the doorway made us spring apart. Cal stood there, looking exhausted and amused in equal measure. Morning, my brother said, fighting a grin. Hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Just planning how to take down a corrupt banker, Jonas said, his hand still on my waist. You know, typical breakfast conversation. Cal laughed, and the tension that had been building since the barn dance finally cracked. We spent the rest of the morning going through Jonas's records, documenting every payment, every transaction. Miguel and Rafael left after breakfast, headed to neighboring ranches to sound out potential allies. Cal prepared to ride to Pueblo, promising to return within 3 days with Martinez or anyone else who'd talk. By noon, it was just Jonas and me left at the ranch, surrounded by paperwork and the enormity of what we were up against. I was copying receipts onto clean paper. We needed duplicates in case something happened to the originals. When Jonas suddenly cursed. What's wrong? I looked up to find him staring at a letter, his face pale. This is from my bank in Denver, dated 2 weeks ago. He handed it to me with shaking hands. They're calling in my ranch loan. Full payment due in 30 days, or they'll foreclose. I scanned the letter, my heart sinking with each line. Jonas had taken out a loan 3 years ago to expand his herd, to be paid back over 5 years with modest interest. He'd never missed a payment, was actually ahead of schedule. But now the bank was demanding full repayment immediately, citing some obscure clause about their right to accelerate the loan at their discretion. This has Boone's fingerprints all over it, I said. He must have connections at your bank, convince them to call the loan. It's legal, Jonas said dully. The clause is right there in the original contract. I just never imagined anyone would actually invoke it. He ran his hands through his hair. I don't have that kind of money, Liquid. Most of my capital is in cattle and land. Even if I sold everything, I couldn't get it together in 30 days. The implications crashed over both of us like a cold wave. Boone wasn't just coming after me anymore. He was coming after Jonas too, punishing him for interfering, for being decent in a world that rewarded cruelty. We fight it, I said firmly. We go to Denver, present your payment history, expose this for what it is, retaliation. And if we lose? If the court sides with the bank? Jonas's voice was hollow. I lose everything, Evelyn. The ranch, the land, years of work. Miguel and Rafael lose their jobs. Cal loses the home he just found. Then we start over somewhere else, I said, moving to stand in front of him, taking his face in my hands and making him look at me. We start over together, and we build something new. Because that's what people do when the world tries to break them. They build something stronger from the pieces. He pulled me close, burying his face in my hair. I could feel his heart hammering against my chest, could feel the tremor running through him. Jonas Keaton, who'd been so strong for me, who'd faced down armed men without flinching, was finally letting himself be vulnerable. "I'm scared," he whispered. "I haven't been this scared since Sarah died, because now I have something to lose again. I have you." "And I have you," I whispered back, "which means we're not fighting this alone." We stood there in the kitchen, holding each other while the afternoon light shifted across the floor and the enormity of our situation settled over us like snow. Outside, cattle lowed in the distance. A hawk cried somewhere over the valley. The world kept turning, indifferent to human struggles, and we held each other and tried to find the courage for what was coming. That evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, Jonas told me stories about building the ranch, how he'd camped in a tent that first winter while he cut logs for the house, how he'd broken 2 ribs when a half-wild horse threw him into a fence post, how he'd almost given up a dozen times but kept going because giving up meant admitting Sarah's death had broken him beyond repair. "This place saved my life," he said quietly, gesturing at the valley spread out before us. "After Sarah died, I was drowning in grief and guilt. Guilt that I was alive and she wasn't, that I got to keep living while she turned to dust. Building this ranch gave me a reason to keep breathing. And now you have another reason," I finished. "Me, us. Whatever future we can build together." He took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. "When we win this, and we will win, because I refuse to believe any other outcome, I want to marry you, Evelyn. Not because I'm trying to protect you, not because it's the decent thing to do, but because I can't imagine spending another day without knowing you're mine and I'm yours." Tears pricked at my eyes. "That sounds like a proposal, Mr. Keaton." "It is." He turned to face me fully, his gray eyes intense in the fading light. "I don't have a ring yet, and God knows this is terrible timing, but I need you to know. When this is over, when we've beaten Boone and saved the ranch and proven that decent people can still win in this world, will you marry me?" I thought about everything that had brought me to this moment. My father's failures, the auction block, Jonas's unexpected kindness, all the small moments that had built into something bigger than either of us alone. I thought about the fear I'd carried for so long, the certainty that happiness was always temporary, always taken away. But looking at Jonas now, seeing the hope and fear and love mingled in his expression, I realized something. Yes, happiness could be taken away, but it could also be fought for, protected, cherished. And maybe that fight, that determination to hold on to joy despite everything, was what made it real. "Yes," I said, and then louder, "Yes, I'll marry you, Jonas Keaton. When this is over, when we've won, I'll marry you, and we'll build a life so beautiful that all this darkness will seem like just a bad dream we once had." He kissed me then, deep and desperate and full of promises, and the sun set fire to the mountains behind us, painting the world in shades of crimson and gold. In that moment, with his arms around me and hope burning in my chest, I believed we could do anything. I believed we could win. 3 days later, Cal returned from Pueblo with unexpected news. He'd found Diego Martinez, who'd agreed to testify about the suspicious fire that destroyed his shop. But more than that, he'd found 6 other people, small business owners, ranchers, even a widow whose husband had supposedly died in an accident on Boone's property, all with stories of Boone's corruption, all willing to speak up if others did the same. Miguel and Rafael returned the same evening with similar reports. The neighboring ranchers, it turned out, had been waiting for someone to stand up to Boone. They'd seen his schemes, suffered from his manipulations, but been too isolated to challenge him alone. Now, learning that Jonas Keaton was taking the fight to Denver, they wanted to help. Within a week, we had a coalition. 15 people with documented grievances against Silas Boone, all willing to travel to Denver and testify. Judge Morrison coordinated everything, sending telegrams, arranging for the hearing to be expanded into a full investigation of Boone's business practices. "You've started something," the judge told us when he came to the ranch to review our evidence. "Something bigger than just your case. If we can prove Boone's corruption, it could bring down half the territorial administration." "Good," Jonas said grimly. They deserve to fall. The hearing was set for 3 weeks away, in territorial court in Denver. We spent those weeks preparing, rehearsing testimony, going over documents until I could recite account numbers in my sleep. Anna and Carmen took turns staying at the ranch with me while the men made trips to Denver to meet with the territorial attorney who'd agreed to represent us, a young firebrand named Samuel Chen who'd built a reputation for taking on powerful men. The night before we were set to leave for Denver, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about everything that could go wrong, all the ways this could end in disaster. Around midnight, I gave up and went to the kitchen, thinking I'd make tea. Jonas was already there, sitting at the table with a single lamp burning, staring at nothing. Couldn't sleep either? I asked, sitting down beside him. Kept thinking about what happens if we lose, if Boone wins and I lose the ranch. He looked at me, his eyes shadowed. I keep trying to imagine starting over somewhere else, and all I see is you standing in another auction block because I couldn't protect you. That won't happen. You don't know that. You're right, I don't. I took his hand. But I know this, whatever happens tomorrow, whatever the court decides, I choose you. Not this ranch, not Colorado, not safety or security. You. If we have to run, we run. If we have to start over with nothing, we start over. As long as we're together, that's enough. Is it? His voice cracked. Is it really enough, Evelyn? You deserve better than a life on the run, better than... I kissed him, cutting off his words, pouring every ounce of love and certainty I possessed into that kiss. When I pulled back, I kept my hands on his face, making him look at me. You are enough, I said fiercely. You have always been enough. The ranch, the money, none of that matters compared to you. So tomorrow we're going to walk into that courtroom with our heads high, and we're going to tell the truth, and we're going to trust that truth still means something in this world. And if it doesn't, if we lose everything, then we'll build something new, together. He pulled me into his lap, wrapping his arms around me, and we sat there in the lamplight, holding each other as if we could will away the dawn and the reckoning it would bring. Outside, an owl called in the darkness. The wind whispered through the aspens, and in the quiet kitchen of a ranch that might soon belong to someone else, two people who'd found each other in the worst of circumstances held tight to hope, and each other, and prayed it would be enough. Dawn came too quickly, breaking over the mountains like a wound opening in the sky. We left the ranch before the sun fully cleared the peaks, a caravan of 3 wagons carrying Jonas, me, Cal, the Ortega brothers, and all our witnesses and evidence. Judge Morrison had gone ahead 2 days earlier to prepare, and Samuel Chen had sent word that he'd meet us at the courthouse steps. The journey to Denver took 2 full days of hard travel. We camped the first night in a canyon outside Colorado Springs, huddled around a fire while Diego Martinez told stories of better times before Boone had destroyed his livelihood. The other witnesses chimed in with their own tales of loss and injustice, their voices growing stronger as they realized they weren't alone. By firelight, with the stars wheeling overhead, our ragtag band of survivors became something more, a united front, a chorus of truth that refused to be silenced. Jonas sat beside me, his shoulder pressed against mine, his hand finding mine in the darkness whenever he thought no one was looking. Cal noticed, of course, my brother missed nothing, but he just smiled and said nothing, his earlier concerns apparently satisfied by the way Jonas looked at me, like I was something precious he'd fight the whole world to keep. We reached Denver on a cold October morning, the city sprawling before us in a haze of coal smoke and progress. It was bigger than I'd imagined, more chaotic, with buildings 3 and 4 stories tall, lining streets crowded with wagons, horses, and people from every corner of the world. The territorial courthouse stood at the center of town, an imposing brick structure with white columns that seemed designed to make ordinary people feel small. Samuel Chen met us on the steps, as promised, a slender Chinese man in his 30s with wire-rimmed glasses and an intensity that crackled like lightning. He'd come to America as a child, worked his way through law school against impossible odds, and now specialized in cases nobody else would touch, the poor against the powerful, the voiceless against the corrupt. Mr. Keaton, Miss Harper. He shook our hands briskly. Judge Morrison has briefed me on everything. I'll be honest, this is going to be difficult. Boone has retained Harrison Blackwood, the best defense attorney money can buy. The territorial secretary who signed that writ is Blackwood's brother-in-law. We're fighting uphill in a rainstorm. But we can win? I asked, hating how desperate I sounded. Chen's expression softened. We have truth on our side, Miss Harper. Whether that's enough? He shrugged. We're about to find out. The hearing starts in 1 hour. Let's go over your testimony one final time. The next hour passed in a blur of last-minute preparations. Chen drilled me on questions Blackwood might ask, coached me on staying calm under pressure, reminded me that my job was simply to tell the truth clearly and completely. Jonas paced the hallway outside the courtroom like a caged animal, his nervous energy so palpable I could feel it from across the room. Finally, the bailiff called us inside. The courtroom was more crowded than I'd expected. Besides our witnesses, there were reporters from 3 different newspapers, curious townspeople, and, sitting in the front row with a smug expression that made my blood boil, Silas Boone himself. He'd dressed for the occasion in an expensive suit that probably cost more than my father had earned in a year, his thinning hair slicked back with pomade, his pig-like eyes gleaming with anticipation. Beside him sat Harrison Blackwood, a silver-haired man in his 50s who radiated the kind of confidence that came from never having lost a case he cared about winning. And behind them, looking distinctly uncomfortable, was Deputy Garrett and several of his men, presumably here to testify on Boone's behalf. The presiding judge was a man named Horatio Stern, a territorial appointee with a reputation for being brilliant, ruthless, and impossible to bribe, which Chen had assured us was the best we could hope for. Stern took his seat at the bench, surveyed the crowded courtroom with sharp eyes, and banged his gavel once. This court is now in session. We're here to address the matter of Harper debts and related complaints against Silas Boone of Copper Bend. Mr. Chen, you may present your case. Chen stood, his voice carrying clearly through the room. Your Honor, what we have here is not a simple debt collection case, but a systematic pattern of fraud, intimidation, and abuse of legal process. Miss Evelyn Harper was nearly sold into indentured servitude to pay her deceased father's gambling debts, debts that Mr. Keaton subsequently paid in full. When Mr. Boone's attempt to profit from Miss Harper's misfortune was thwarted, he retaliated by fabricating additional debts and using his political connections to obtain a writ of attachment. But Miss Harper's case is merely the tip of a much larger iceberg. Over the next few hours, we will present testimony from 15 individuals who have been victimized by Mr. Boone's predatory practices. Blackwood rose smoothly. Your Honor, these are serious allegations being leveled against a respected businessman based on the word of malcontents and debtors who simply don't want to pay what they owe. Mr. Boone has operated within the law at all times. If some people made poor financial decisions and suffered the consequences, that is not corruption, that is capitalism. Judge Stern's expression gave away nothing. I'll hear the evidence and decide for myself. Mr. Chen, call your first witness. The people call Miss Evelyn Harper. My legs felt like water as I walked to the witness stand. The bailiff had me place my hand on a Bible and swear to tell the truth, and then I was sitting in a wooden chair facing the entire courtroom, with everyone's eyes on me and my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. Chen approached with a reassuring smile. Miss Harper, please tell the court about the events of September 15th of this year. I took a deep breath and began. I told them about my father's death, about the debts I'd inherited, about standing on that auction block while men bid for the right to own me. I told them about Jonas stepping forward, paying my debt, and setting me free. My voice shook at first, but as I spoke, I found my strength. This was my story, my truth, and no one could take it away from me. Chen guided me through the timeline, introducing receipts and documents that proved Jonas had paid every cent of my father's original debts. Then he moved to the fabricated charges. Miss Harper, Mr. Boone claims you owe $300 for room and board at the Silver Star Hotel and supplies from the general store. Is this true? No, sir. I stayed one night at the hotel, which Mr. Keaton paid for. I never purchased anything from the general store. Do you have proof? Jonas stood and handed Chen a document. Receipt from the Silver Star, paid in full, and a statement from the general store owner confirming Miss Harper made no purchases on credit. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Boone's face reddened, but Blackwood remained calm. When Chen finished, Blackwood stood for cross-examination. He circled me slowly, like a shark scenting blood. Miss Harper, isn't it true that you've been living at Mr. Keaton's ranch for the past 2 months? Yes, sir. I work there as a simple yes or no will suffice. And isn't it true that you and Mr. Keaton are intimately involved? Heat flooded my cheeks. We're engaged to be married, yes. How convenient. A wealthy rancher saves you from debt, and suddenly you're engaged. Blackwood's voice dripped with insinuation. Tell me, Miss Harper, what exactly were you willing to do to secure Mr. Keaton's protection? Objection! Chen shot to his feet. Counsel is badgering the witness and implying is sustained. Judge Stern fixed Blackwood with a cold stare. Mr. Blackwood, I will not have you impugning this young woman's character without evidence. Stick to the facts. Blackwood smiled thinly. Of course, Your Honor. Miss Harper, isn't it possible that you did incur these debts and simply forgot? Or that you're lying to protect your benefactor? No. I met his eyes steadily, channeling every ounce of anger and fear into my voice. I'm telling the truth. Mr. Boone fabricated those debts because Jonas Keaton humiliated him by paying my father's debt and freeing me. This is revenge, pure and simple. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. And I'm not the only one he's hurt. Blackwood dismissed me with a wave, clearly thinking he'd planted enough doubt. But as I returned to my seat beside Jonas, his hand found mine and squeezed, and I saw approval in Chen's eyes. I'd held my ground. The rest of the morning was a parade of witnesses, each telling their story of Boone's corruption. Diego Martinez described how his saddle shop had mysteriously burned the day after he refused to sell his land at a fraction of its value. A widow named Martha Brennan testified that her husband had died in an accident at Boone's lumber mill, an accident that occurred just days after he'd threatened to report safety violations to the territorial authorities. One by one, they spoke their truths, and one by one, Blackwood tried to discredit them. He painted them as liars, cheats, people looking for someone to blame for their own failures. But there were too many of them, their stories too consistent, their documentation too thorough. By the time court adjourned for lunch, the tide had clearly shifted. Even Judge Stern, impassive as stone, seemed troubled by what he'd heard. We ate in a small restaurant near the courthouse, though none of us had much appetite. Chen reviewed the afternoon strategy. He'd be calling financial experts to analyze Boone's business practices, banking officials to discuss the suspicious loan acceleration on Jonas's ranch. Blackwood will argue that everything was legal, that having the right to do something makes it right, Chen said. Our job is to show the pattern, to prove that Boone systematically abuses legal processes for personal gain. If we can do that, Judge Stern has the authority to not only dismiss the case against Miss Harper, but also recommend criminal investigations. And if we can't? Jonas asked. Chen didn't answer, which was answer enough. The afternoon session began with testimony from a banking examiner who'd reviewed Jonas's loan documents. The man was dry as dust, speaking in a monotone about interest rates and acceleration clauses. But his conclusion was damning. The loan acceleration was legal, but highly unusual, typically reserved for borrowers in default. Jonas's payment history was spotless, making the bank's decision suspicious at best. Is it possible, Chen asked, that external pressure was applied to the bank to call this loan? Objection, speculation, Blackwood called. Sustained, but I'll allow some latitude, Judge Stern said. The witness may answer in general terms. The examiner adjusted his spectacles. In my 20 years reviewing banking practices, I've seen this type of unusual acceleration exactly 4 times. In 3 of those cases, we later discovered that influential third parties had requested the action as a favor or in exchange for other considerations. Another murmur rippled through the courtroom. Boone was sweating now, his confident smirk long gone. Chen called witnesses from Boone's own bank, clerks who'd overheard conversations, a bookkeeper who'd noticed irregularities in account ledgers. Not everything they said was admissible, and Blackwood objected at every turn. But the picture they painted was clear. Silas Boone had built his empire on intimidation, fraud, and the abuse of his connections to territorial authorities. As the afternoon wore on, I watched Boone's facade crumble. He whispered urgently to Blackwood, his face growing redder, his hands trembling. This wasn't how he'd expected things to go. He'd thought his money and influence would be enough, that truth was just another commodity to be bought and sold. He'd been wrong. Finally, as the sun began to slant through the courtroom windows, Chen called his final witness, Judge Morrison himself. The old judge took the stand with dignity, his cane resting beside him, his white hair catching the light like a halo. Judge Morrison, Chen said respectfully, you've served as a territorial judge for 35 years. In that time, have you ever seen a case quite like this one? No, Morrison said simply. I've seen corruption before. It's endemic to frontier territories where law is still finding its footing, but I've never seen someone weaponize legal process quite so thoroughly as Silas Boone. He's found every loophole, exploited every ambiguity, used every connection to turn the law into a tool of oppression rather than justice. Objection, Blackwood said wearily. The witness is offering opinion, not fact. Your Honor, Chen countered, Judge Morrison's expertise and experience make his opinion highly relevant to this case. I'll allow it, Stern said. Continue. Morrison leaned forward, his eyes boring into Boone across the courtroom. That writ of attachment Deputy Garrett presented was legal in its form, but corrupt in its purpose. It was obtained through lies, executed through intimidation, and designed to terrorize an innocent young woman into submission. And when that didn't work, Boone went after the man who'd helped her, trying to destroy his livelihood as punishment for having the audacity to be decent. The old judge's voice rose, filling the courtroom with righteous anger. This is not how justice works. This is tyranny dressed in legal robes, and it must be stopped. The courtroom erupted in applause. Judge Stern banged his gavel for order, but even he looked moved by Morrison's words. Blackwood rose for cross-examination, but his heart clearly wasn't in it anymore. He asked a few perfunctory questions, trying to suggest that Morrison was biased because he knew the parties involved, but the old judge deflected every attack with ease. When Morrison stepped down, Chen announced, "The people rest, Your Honor." Blackwood conferred with Boone for several minutes, their conversation growing increasingly heated. Finally, Blackwood stood. Your Honor, the defense would like to request a recess until tomorrow morning to prepare our case. Denied, Stern said flatly. You've had weeks to prepare, Mr. Blackwood. Present your defense now or forfeit. Blackwood's jaw tightened. Very well, the defense calls Silas Boone to the stand. Boone hauled himself up and walked to the witness stand, his earlier confidence completely gone. He'd aged a decade in the last few hours, his face gray and drawn. Blackwood led him through a carefully scripted account of his business practices, portraying him as a shrewd but honest businessman simply trying to collect legitimate debts. But when Chen stood for cross-examination, he went for the throat. Mr. Boone, you testified that Miss Harper owed you $300 for hotel stays and store purchases. Can you produce receipts for these transactions? The receipts were lost in... Lost? How convenient. Can anyone corroborate these charges? The hotel owner, the store clerk? They don't keep detailed records. Actually, they do. Chen produced documents. Here's a statement from Henry Whitmore, owner of the general store, confirming that Miss Harper never made any purchases on credit. And here's a ledger from the Silver Star Hotel showing only one night's stay, paid in full by Jonas Keaton. So I'll ask you again, Mr. Boone, what evidence do you have that Miss Harper owes you any money at all? Boone's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Her father's debts included implied future obligations. Implied future obligations? Chen's voice rose. That's not law, Mr. Boone. That's fiction. You fabricated these debts out of whole cloth because you were angry that Mr. Keaton interfered with your scheme to profit from a desperate woman's misfortune. Isn't that the truth? No, I was within my rights. Were you within your rights to pressure Jonas Keaton's bank to accelerate his loan? I never... Chen produced another document. This is a letter from you to the bank president, suggesting that Mr. Keaton might be a risky borrower worth monitoring closely. Dated 1 week after Mr. Keaton paid Miss Harper's debts. Quite a coincidence, wouldn't you say? Boone was sweating profusely now, his collar dark with moisture. Business associates exchange information all the time. And is it normal business practice to recommend foreclosure on a borrower who's never missed a payment? A borrower whose only crime was crossing you? Objection! Blackwood was on his feet. Counsel is harassing my client. Overruled. Answer the question, Mr. Boone. I was trying to protect the bank's interests. Chen pressed harder, walking Boone through each case of alleged corruption, forcing him to explain coincidence after impossible coincidence. The saddle shop fire that occurred after Diego Martinez refused to sell. The lumber mill accident that killed a whistleblower. The foreclosures on properties Boone later acquired at auction for pennies on the dollar. By the time Chen finished, Boone was a broken man, his lies crumbling around him like a house built on sand. No further questions, Chen said with quiet satisfaction. Blackwood tried to rehabilitate his client on redirect, but the damage was done. When Boone finally stepped down from the witness stand, he looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Judge Stern called a brief recess, then returned to deliver his ruling. The courtroom fell silent, everyone leaning forward in anticipation. I've been a judge for 15 years, Stern began, his voice grave. In that time, I've heard thousands of cases, disputes over land, conflicts over contracts, accusations of every crime imaginable. But I have never, in all those years, seen such a systematic abuse of legal process as I've witnessed here today. He fixed Boone with a withering stare. Mr. Boone, you've used your wealth and connections to turn the law into a weapon, to terrorize people who couldn't fight back, to profit from human suffering. You've corrupted officials, fabricated evidence, and shown a complete disregard for basic decency. And when someone finally stood up to you, you tried to destroy them. Boone's face had gone from gray to white. As to the matter immediately before this court, the alleged debts of Miss Evelyn Harper, I find that these debts are entirely fabricated. The writ of attachment obtained by Deputy Garrett was based on fraudulent claims and is hereby vacated. Miss Harper owes Silas Boone nothing, not 1 cent. Stern's gavel came down like thunder. Furthermore, I'm referring this case to the Territorial Attorney General for criminal investigation. The evidence suggests multiple violations of territorial law, including fraud, intimidation, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Mr. Boone, I strongly suggest you retain excellent legal counsel, because you're going to need it. The courtroom exploded. People were cheering, crying, embracing. Our witnesses clustered around Chen, pumping his hand and thanking him. Diego Martinez had tears streaming down his weathered face. Martha Brennan was sobbing with relief. And Jonas pulled me into his arms and held me so tight I could barely breathe, his face buried in my hair, his shoulders shaking. We won, he whispered, his voice breaking. Oh God, Evelyn, we won. We won, I repeated, the words not quite feeling real yet. It's over. It's really over. But even as I said it, even as relief washed through me like a cleansing rain, I saw Boone rising from his seat. He moved like a sleepwalker, his eyes unfocused, all the fight gone out of him. Deputy Garrett and his men had already slipped out the back, clearly wanting no part of the fallout to come. Blackwood was packing his briefcase with jerky, angry movements, his perfect record finally tarnished. Judge Morrison made his way through the crowd to us, his face split by a wide smile. Well done, all of you. I knew if we could just get the truth in front of an honest judge, justice would prevail. What happens now? Cal asked, appearing at my side with Miguel and Raphael. To Boone, I mean? That depends on the Attorney General's investigation, Morrison said. But based on what came out today, at minimum, he'll lose his banking license, probably face criminal charges. His empire is finished. Chen joined us, his normally composed demeanor cracked by a genuine smile. Congratulations. That was one of the most satisfying victories I've ever had in court. Thank you, Jonas said, shaking the attorney's hand. We couldn't have done this without you. You could have, actually. You had the truth on your side. I just helped you present it clearly. Chen adjusted his glasses. Now, there's one more matter to address, Mr. Keaton's ranch loan. My heart, which had just started to settle, kicked back into high gear. What about it? Judge Stern's ruling affects that too. The loan acceleration was clearly retaliatory, obtained through Boone's influence. I've already spoken with the bank's representatives here in Denver. They're prepared to rescind the acceleration and restore the original loan terms. Seems they're eager to distance themselves from anything connected to Silas Boone right now. Jonas looked like he might fall over. The ranch? I get to keep the ranch? You get to keep everything, Mr. Keaton. Your land, your home, your reputation, your future. Chen's smile widened. Seems like a good day for new beginnings. We left the courthouse in a daze, stepping out into the cool October evening. Denver's streets were lighting up with gas lamps, the city transforming into something magical and full of possibility. Behind us, inside the courthouse, Boone was being questioned by marshals about the criminal investigation. His world was crumbling while ours was being reborn. That night, we celebrated at a restaurant recommended by Judge Morrison, a fine establishment with white tablecloths and more forks per place setting than I'd ever seen. Our entire group crowded around a long table, eating food that tasted like victory and drinking toasts to justice, to courage, to second chances. Diego Martinez raised his glass. To Jonas Keaton, who reminded us what it means to stand up for what's right. To Evelyn Harper, Martha Brennan added, whose bravery gave the rest of us courage. To Samuel Chen, Cal chimed in, the best damn lawyer in Colorado. We drank and laughed and told stories late into the night, our voices rising over the clinking of glasses and the hum of other diners. For the first time in months, we weren't looking over our shoulders, weren't waiting for the other shoe to drop. We were simply alive, simply free, and that was enough. Later, after the others had returned to their hotels, Jonas and I walked through Denver's lamplit streets, hand in hand, not ready to let the day end quite yet. We found ourselves in a small park, a patch of green surrounded by the city's bustle, and sat on a bench beneath a maple tree, just beginning to turn gold. I keep waiting to wake up, Jonas said softly. To find out this was all a dream, and we're still fighting, still scared. It's real, I assured him, squeezing his hand. We're free, Jonas. Really, truly free. He turned to face me, the lamplight catching in his gray eyes and turning them silver. Then I guess it's time to make good on that proposal. Evelyn Harper, will you marry me? Not someday when things are settled, not eventually when we've figured everything out, but soon. Soon as we get back to the ranch. Because I don't want to spend another day without you being my wife. Tears blurred my vision, but they were happy tears, joyful tears, the kind I'd thought I might never cry again. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. He pulled a small box from his pocket. When had he found time to buy a ring? And opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the light and threw tiny rainbows across my hand. It wasn't fancy or expensive, but it was perfect. I bought it 3 weeks ago, he admitted as he slipped it onto my finger. Before the hearing, before I knew how any of this would turn out, I was so certain we'd win because the alternative, losing you, losing everything, wasn't something I could let myself imagine. I kissed him then, there in that Denver park with the city lights glowing around us and the future spreading out before us like an open road. We'd walk through fire and come out the other side stronger, scarred perhaps, but not broken. We'd face down corruption and cruelty and won with nothing but truth and determination. And now, finally, we could start living instead of just surviving. We returned to the ranch 3 days later, our wagons lighter without the weight of fear pressing down on us, our hearts fuller than they'd been in months. The valley spread out before us in all its autumn glory, the aspens burning gold against the dark pines, the creek catching the afternoon sun like liquid silver. Coming home had never felt sweeter. Miguel and Rafael rode ahead to spread the news of our victory, and by the time our wagons pulled into the yard, Ana and Carmen were waiting with their children, tears of joy streaming down their faces. The women embraced me like I was family, laughing and crying at once, while the children danced around Jonas, firing questions about Denver and the courthouse, and whether the bad banker was really going to jail. We're getting married, I announced, holding up my hand so the ring caught the light. In 2 weeks, right here in the valley. Ana gasped and grabbed my hand, examining the ring with the critical eye of someone who understood what such tokens meant. It's beautiful, simple, elegant, perfect for you. She looked up at Jonas with approval. You did well, boss. I had good motivation, he replied, his arm sliding around my waist in a gesture that was becoming wonderfully familiar. That evening, as the sun painted the mountains in shades of crimson and gold, we gathered on the porch, all of us, the makeshift family we'd become through struggle and solidarity. Cal sat on the steps, whittling a piece of wood. Miguel and Rafael leaned against the railing, trading jokes in Spanish, and Jonas and I occupied the old rocking chairs his father had built, our hands clasped between the armrests where anyone could see. "I've been thinking," Cal said, not looking up from his whittling, "about staying here permanent-like. If you'll have me, Jonas." "I know I haven't proven myself much yet, but I'm a hard worker, and I learn fast." "Already proved yourself," Jonas said firmly. "You rode to Pueblo, found Martinez, helped build our case. Far as I'm concerned, you've got a place here as long as you want it." Cal's knife stilled, and when he looked up, his eyes were bright with emotion. "Appreciate that. Haven't had a real home since I left for California. Feels good to have roots again." "What about you two?" I asked Miguel and Rafael. "After everything that's happened, if you wanted to find work somewhere quieter, somewhere without all this drama—" Rafael laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Are you kidding? We just helped take down the most corrupt banker in Colorado. That's the kind of story a man tells his grandchildren. Besides, boss pays fair, the work is good, and now we get to watch him try to plan a wedding. That alone is worth staying for." "I know how to plan a wedding," Jonas protested. "Boss, you eat beans straight from the can when Evelyn's not around. No offense, but wedding planning requires a level of civilization you haven't quite mastered." Everyone laughed, even Jonas, and the sound echoed across the valley like a benediction. We talked long into the night, making plans not just for the wedding, but for the ranch's future, for expanding the herd, for maybe building another cabin where Cal could have his own space, for all the ordinary dreams that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of preparation that made facing down Silas Boone in court seem simple by comparison. Anna and Carmen took charge of the wedding arrangements with the fierce determination of generals planning a campaign, and I quickly learned that arguing with them was futile. They knew every woman within 50 miles who could sew, bake, or arrange flowers, and they mobilized that network with frightening efficiency. "You just worry about being beautiful," Anna told me when I tried to insist on helping. "Leave the rest to us." My wedding dress came together like magic, sewn by 3 women in town who'd heard about our victory and wanted to contribute. It was simple but elegant, made of cream-colored silk that Carmen had somehow procured from a merchant in Colorado Springs, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs that had belonged to Anna's grandmother. When I tried it on for the first time, standing in front of the small mirror in my room, I barely recognized myself. The frightened girl who'd stood on that auction block was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd faced her demons and won, who'd found love in the unlikeliest of places, who'd learned that strength came not from never falling, but from getting back up every single time. "You look like a queen," Carmen said softly, adjusting the lace at my shoulders. "Jonas is going to forget how to breathe when he sees you." "That might make the vows complicated," I joked, but my voice caught on the words. In 3 days, I would marry Jonas Keaton. In 3 days, I would stop being Evelyn Harper and become Evelyn Keaton. The name felt strange on my tongue, unfamiliar but right, like a coat that needed breaking in before it fit perfectly. Jonas, for his part, threw himself into ranch work with renewed vigor, as if he needed to prove to himself that this was all real, that we really had won, that the ranch really was safe. He and Cal worked from sunrise to sunset mending fences, checking cattle, preparing for the coming winter. But every evening, no matter how tired he was, Jonas would find me on the porch, and we'd sit together watching the stars come out, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's rhythms and patterns. "Nervous?" he asked 2 nights before the wedding, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. "Terrified," I admitted. "Not about marrying you, that's the only thing I'm certain of, but about being a wife, running a household, living up to what people expect. You've been running this household for 2 months already, and doing a better job than I ever did. As for expectations—" He turned to look at me, his face serious in the moonlight. "The only expectation I have is that you be yourself. That's all I want, Evelyn. Not some perfect idea of what a wife should be, but you, stubborn and brave and funny and real." "I can do that?" I whispered. "I think I can definitely do that." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and cool, the kind of perfect autumn day that felt like a gift from a benevolent universe. I woke before sunrise, too nervous to sleep, and found Anna already in the kitchen making coffee and humming a Spanish melody that sounded like hope set to music. "The bride should be resting," she scolded gently, but her eyes were warm. Couldn't sleep. Too many thoughts spinning around in my head. She poured me a cup of coffee and sat down beside me. When I married Miguel, I was 17 and scared out of my mind. I kept thinking about all the ways I might fail him, all the things I didn't know about being a wife. My mother told me something that morning that I've never forgotten. What did she say? She said that marriage isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up every day and choosing to love that person, even when they leave their boots in the middle of the floor, or snore like a bear, or forget important anniversaries. Anna smiled at the memories. She said the only thing that matters is whether you want to keep choosing them, day after day, year after year. Everything else you figure out as you go. And do you still choose him? Every single day, even when he drives me crazy. She squeezed my hand. From what I've seen, you and Jonas have already chosen each other through the worst circumstances imaginable. The rest is just living into that choice. As the sun climbed higher, the ranch transformed into something out of a dream. Neighbors began arriving in wagons and on horseback, not just from nearby ranches, but from Copper Bend itself, people who'd heard about our victory and wanted to celebrate with us. Henry Whitmore came with his son Tom, bearing a set of fine china as a gift. Father Daniels arrived with his worn Bible and a smile that could light up a dark room. Even Judge Morrison made the long journey, his old bones protesting every bump in the road, but his spirit unbowed. "Wouldn't miss this for the world," the judge told me when I expressed surprise at seeing him. "After everything you two have been through, seeing you marry feels like watching justice itself walk down the aisle." Diego Martinez came with a beautiful saddle he'd crafted himself, refusing payment despite Jonas's protests. Martha Brennan brought preserves and jams enough to last through the winter. One by one, the people whose lives we'd touched, whose courage we'd helped awaken, came to bear witness and celebrate. Cal found me in my room as I was putting the final touches on my hair, his eyes suspiciously bright. "You look just like Ma," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "She'd be so proud of you, Evie. So damn proud." I hugged him tight, this brother who'd come back to me just when I needed him most, who'd stood beside me through the trial and never wavered. "I love you, Cal. Thank you for finding your way back to me." Couldn't stay lost forever. Besides, someone needs to walk you down that aisle, and I'll be damned if I let anyone else have the honor. The ceremony was held beneath the aspens at the edge of the valley, where the trees formed a natural cathedral, and the mountains rose up like witnesses. Someone had built a simple arbor decorated with late-season wildflowers and golden leaves. Chairs borrowed from 3 different ranches stood in rows facing the arbor, every seat filled with people who'd become our community, our chosen family. As Cal walked me down the makeshift aisle, my hand tucked into his elbow, I saw Jonas waiting beneath the arbor. He'd cleaned up better than I'd ever seen him, in a new black suit that Carmen had insisted he buy in Denver, his hair combed back, his jaw freshly shaved. But it was his eyes that caught me and held me, those storm-gray eyes that had looked at me with kindness when I'd had nothing, that had seen me at my weakest and loved me anyway, that now looked at me with such open adoration that I felt my throat tighten with emotion. Raphael stood beside him as his best man, grinning broadly. Anna waited on my side as matron of honor, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. And Father Daniel stood before the arbor with his Bible open, ready to bind our lives together in the sight of God and these good people. Cal placed my hand in Jonas's and stepped back, and suddenly the world narrowed to just the two of us, standing before each other with our whole future stretching ahead like an unwritten book. "Dearly beloved," Father Daniels began, his voice carrying across the clearing, "we are gathered here today to witness the joining of Jonas Keaton and Evelyn Harper in holy matrimony. This is a union forged not just in joy, but in trial, tested by fire, and found true. If anyone can show just cause why these two should not be joined, speak now, or forever hold your peace." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the rustle of aspen leaves and the distant call of a hawk. No one spoke because there was nothing to say. Anyone with eyes could see that we belonged together. "Jonas," Father Daniel said, "do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish till death do you part?" "I do." Jonas's voice was steady, sure, his eyes never leaving mine. "And I promise to be worthy of that gift every day of my life." "Evelyn, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish till death do you part?" "I do," I said, and the words felt like a key turning in a lock, opening a door to a future I'd once thought impossible. "With all my heart." Jonas pulled out a second ring, a match to my own, simple gold that caught the sunlight. He slipped it onto my finger, his hand surprisingly steady despite the emotion I could see swimming in his eyes. "With this ring," he said, "I thee wed." "Every cent I paid for your freedom, Evelyn, was the best money I've ever spent. But I'm paying for a lot more than that now. I'm paying with my whole heart, my whole life, forever. And I consider it the bargain of a lifetime." Laughter rippled through the gathered witnesses, soft and warm, and I had to blink back tears as I took his ring and slipped it onto his finger. "With this ring, I thee wed." You bought my freedom, Jonas Keaton, but I'm giving you something freely that can never be bought. My love, my trust, my tomorrow. Take them knowing they're yours for as long as stars shine and the mountains stand. By the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, Father Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jonas, you may kiss your bride. Jonas cupped my face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle, and kissed me with a sweetness that made my toes curl in my borrowed shoes. The gathered crowd erupted in cheers and applause, but I barely heard them. There was only Jonas, his lips on mine, his arms around me, and the certain knowledge that I was finally, completely, irrevocably home. The celebration that followed was something out of a fairy tale. Tables had been set up in the yard, groaning under the weight of food that everyone had contributed, roasted chickens and beef, fresh bread and preserves, pies and cakes of every description. Someone had brought a fiddle, another a guitar, and soon music filled the valley, lively reels that had people dancing in the grass, young and old alike. Jonas and I led the first dance, spinning across the makeshift dance floor while everyone watched and cheered. He'd claimed he couldn't dance, but he moved with surprising grace, holding me close and whispering things in my ear that made me blush and laugh in equal measure. Worth every coin, he murmured as we swayed to a slower tune, his breath warm against my temple. Worth everything, Evelyn Keaton. Say that again, I requested, loving the sound of it. Evelyn Keaton, my wife, the woman who's going to drive me crazy and keep me sane in equal measure for the rest of my life. That's quite a job description. You're more than qualified. We danced until my feet ached, then danced some more. Cal cut in at one point, spinning me around until I was dizzy and laughing. Miguel and Rafael took turns as well, both of them offering brotherly advice about married life that was equal parts helpful and ridiculous. Even old Judge Morrison insisted on one dance, moving slowly but with courtly precision. You did good, child, he told me as we moved across the grass. Both of you did. You reminded this old man that honor and decency still mean something in this world. We couldn't have done it without you. Perhaps, but I just opened doors. You two walked through them with courage. That's what matters. He smiled, his wrinkled face full of warmth. Be happy, Evelyn. You've earned it. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of orange and purple, people gradually began to leave, heading home before darkness fell. They departed with hugs and well wishes, promises to visit soon, invitations for us to come calling. Our community, these people who'd stood with us, were sending us off into married life with their blessings and support. Finally, as the last wagon disappeared down the valley road, it was just us, Jonas, me, Cal, and the Ortega brothers. We sat on the porch watching the stars come out, exhausted and happy and full of good food and better company. I'm going to bunk with Miguel and Rafael tonight, Cal announced, standing and stretching. "Give you two some privacy on your wedding night." "You don't have to," I started, but Cal waved me off. "Yes, I do. You're married now, Evie. You deserve time alone with your husband without your brother snoring in the next room." He kissed the top of my head. "Be happy, sister. You've earned it." Miguel and Rafael followed him to the barn, calling out teasing goodbyes that made me blush. And then it was just Jonas and me, sitting on the porch of our home, not his anymore, but ours, with the valley spread out before us and a lifetime ahead. "Tired?" Jonas asked, his arm around my shoulders. "Exhausted, happy, a little overwhelmed." I leaned into him, breathing in the scent of him, leather and pine and something uniquely his. Is it always going to be like this? This feeling that I might wake up and find it was all a dream? If it is, we're having the same dream, and I'm not planning on waking up anytime soon. He stood and offered me his hand. "Come on, Mrs. Keaton, let me show you to our room." Our room, not his room, not the guest room where I'd spent the last 2 months, but the room we'd share from this night forward. Jonas had spent the last week fixing it up, adding curtains that Anna had sewn, refinishing the old dresser that had belonged to his mother, building a new bed frame large enough for two. He lit the lamp on the bedside table and warm light spilled across the space. It was simple but beautiful, like everything at the ranch, honest and real and full of possibility. "I need to tell you something," Jonas said, suddenly nervous. "I know we're married now, and there are expectations about wedding nights, but Evelyn, we don't have to do anything you're not ready for. We can wait. We can take our time. I didn't marry you I married you because I love you, and everything else can happen when you're ready." My heart, which I'd thought couldn't possibly hold any more love, somehow expanded to fit even more. This man, this beautiful, honorable man who'd saved me and stood with me, and now wanted to make sure I felt safe on what was supposed to be the most intimate night of our lives. I stepped closer to him, close enough to see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his skin. Jonas Keaton. I have never been more ready for anything in my life. I'm not scared. I'm not uncertain. I'm here with you because this is exactly where I want to be. What followed was tender and sweet and sometimes awkward in the way that first times often are. But it was perfect because it was ours. Jonas was gentle and patient, reading my reactions, making sure I was comfortable, whispering words of love and reassurance that made me feel cherished in ways I'd never imagined. And when we finally came together, truly became one in every sense of that word, it felt like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. Afterward, we lay tangled together in the lamplight, my head on his chest, his fingers trailing lazy patterns on my bare shoulder. I could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong, and matched my breathing to its rhythm. "I love you," he said into the comfortable silence. "I don't think I've said that enough today." "You've said it approximately 47 times. I counted." "Not nearly enough then. I love you, Evelyn. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you hum when you're cooking and don't realize it. I love how you argue with me when you think I'm being stubborn and how you make everyone around you feel like they matter. I love that you chose me. Out of all the people in the world, you chose me to share your life with." Tears slipped down my cheeks, but they were happy tears. "I love you too. I love your quiet strength and your terrible jokes and the way you care for everyone without making a big deal about it. I love that you saw me at my lowest and chose to lift me up instead of walk away. And I love that every morning for the rest of my life, I get to wake up beside you and choose you all over again." We fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, and in the knowledge that we were finally, truly home. The months that followed were perhaps the happiest of my life. Winter came to the valley, bringing snow that transformed the landscape into a pristine wonderland. Jonas taught me to track game through fresh powder, showed me where ice formed on the creek in patterns like frozen flowers. We spent long evenings by the fire reading to each other, playing cards with Cal and the Ortega brothers, planning for spring. News filtered in from Denver through occasional letters from Judge Morrison. The Territorial Attorney General had launched a full investigation into Silas Boone's business practices. The banker had been formally charged with fraud, conspiracy, and a dozen other crimes. His empire had crumbled almost overnight. People he'd victimized finally finding the courage to come forward, debts he'd held being declared void by the courts, properties he'd seized being returned to their rightful owners. In February, word came that Boone had been convicted and sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison. Deputy Garrett, implicated in the scheme, had been stripped of his badge and run out of Colorado entirely. The corrupt territorial officials who'd helped them were facing their own investigations. "Justice," Jonas said when we got the news, raising a glass of whiskey and toast. "Real, actual justice. I didn't think it was possible." "We made it possible," I corrected. "We and everyone else who refused to stay silent." As spring arrived and the valley began to green, I discovered I was pregnant. The realization came one morning as I was making breakfast, and the smell of bacon made me violently ill. Anna took one look at me and smiled knowingly. "How far along?" she asked. I'm not sure. Maybe 6 weeks?" Jonas nearly fell over when I told him, his face cycling through shock, joy, and terror in rapid succession. "A baby? We're having a baby?" "We are. Sometime in October, if I'm calculating right." He pulled me into his arms and held me for a long time, not speaking, just holding me and marveling at the miracle of it. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "I'm going to be a father. Oh God, Evelyn, what if I'm terrible at it? What if—" "You're going to be wonderful," I assured him. "You've got 8 months to panic about it. For now, just be happy with me." Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Cal was thrilled at the news, immediately starting to plan an addition to the house for when the baby grew older. Miguel and Rafael argued about whether it would be a boy or girl, each convinced they could predict the baby's gender by some ridiculous folk method. Anna and Carmen descended on the ranch with baby clothes they'd saved from their own children, offering advice and support and the kind of maternal wisdom that only comes from experience. I worked as long as I could, only stopping when I grew too large to move comfortably. Jonas became almost comically protective, insisting I rest constantly, trying to do all my chores himself until I threatened to hit him with a rolling pin if he didn't let me maintain some independence. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," I reminded him for the 100th time. "I know, but what if—" "No what ifs. We've spent too much of our life together worrying about what might go wrong. Let's just enjoy what's going right." Our daughter was born on a crisp October evening, with Anna and Carmen attending and Jonas pacing a trench in the yard outside because the women wouldn't let him in the room. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when I thought I might not survive it. But finally, as the sun was setting and painting the mountains gold, she arrived, red-faced and screaming and absolutely perfect. "A girl," Anna announced, wrapping the baby in a soft blanket. "A beautiful, healthy girl." They cleaned her up and handed her to me, and I looked down at this tiny person we'd created, Jonas's eyes and my dark hair, impossibly small fingers that gripped mine with surprising strength, and felt my heart expand in ways I hadn't known possible. Jonas finally came into the room, moving like he was afraid the floor might collapse beneath him. When he saw me holding our daughter, tears started streaming down his weathered face. "She's perfect," he whispered, sitting beside me on the bed and tracing our daughter's tiny face with one finger. "She looks just like you. She has your eyes. Best of both worlds, then." He kissed my forehead, then the baby's. "What should we name her?" We talked about names during the pregnancy, but never settled on one. Now, looking at her peaceful face as she nursed, inspiration struck. "Sarah," I said softly. "Sarah Hope Keaton. For the woman who loved you first, and for the hope that carried us through everything." Jonas went very still, and when he looked at me, his eyes were swimming with emotion. "You'd do that? Name her after—" "She was part of your story, part of what made you the man you are, and I want our daughter to carry her name as a blessing, not a ghost. She was your past, and this Sarah is our future." He kissed me then, deeply and desperately, our daughter cradled between us. "I don't deserve you." "Lucky for you, love isn't about deserving. It's about choosing, and I choose you. Every day, Jonas Keaton. Every single day." Sarah Hope grew quickly, filling the house with laughter and chaos in equal measure. Cal was a devoted uncle, whittling toys for her and singing off-key lullabies. Miguel and Rafael competed for the title of favorite honorary uncle, teaching her Spanish words before she could even sit up properly. Ana and Carmen were ever present, offering advice and help, and the kind of loving support that made me grateful we'd built such a strong community. 2 years after Sarah was born, we had a son, Thomas Jonas Keaton, named for my father and his, a way of honoring the complicated men who'd shaped our lives while choosing to be better than they'd managed. And 3 years after that, another daughter came along, wild-haired and fearless, whom we named Grace after Jonas's mother. The ranch prospered. Jonas's careful management and hard work paid off in expanding herds and improving land. Cal proved invaluable, eventually taking over much of the daily operations while Jonas focused on breeding programs and business development. Miguel and Rafael bought property adjacent to ours, building homes for their growing families while continuing to work the ranch. Years passed in a blur of seasons, springs spent calving and branding, summers working cattle and mending fences, autumns preparing for winter, winters huddled by the fire telling stories and planning for the next year. Our children grew strong and healthy, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with chores as soon as they were able, becoming part of the land the way Jonas and I had. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the ranch was peaceful, Jonas and I would sit on the porch and remember that day at the auction block, that moment when our lives had intersected and changed everything. It seemed like a lifetime ago and yesterday, all at once. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked him one such evening, watching the sun set over the mountains we'd come to know so well. "Paying that debt? Getting involved in all that chaos?" Jonas looked at me like I'd grown a second head. "Regret you? Regret our life together? Our children? This home we've built? Evelyn, paying your father's debt was the best decision I ever made. Worth every cent and 1,000 times more. Even when the kids are driving you crazy and the cattle are breaking through fences and nothing goes according to plan? Especially then." He pulled me close, and I settled against him with the ease of long practice. Because even on our worst days together, they're better than my best days alone. You taught me that living isn't the same as surviving, that opening your heart to love means risking loss, but the alternative is no life at all. Pretty philosophical for a cowboy. I have hidden depths. Yes, you do. We sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars began to appear. From inside the house, we could hear the children settling down for bed, their voices carrying through the open windows. Cal's deeper rumble as he read them a story, the faint lowing of cattle in the distance, the wind whispering through the aspens. "I paid your debt with forever," Jonas said quietly, echoing the words he'd spoken at our wedding. "And I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Every day with you is a gift I never expected to receive. And every day with you is a gift I'll never take for granted." I turned to kiss him, this man who'd saved me and loved me and built a life with me that exceeded my wildest dreams. "Thank you, Jonas Keaton, for seeing me when I was invisible, for choosing me when you could have walked away, for loving me when I couldn't love myself." "Always," he promised. "From that first moment to this one and every moment that comes after. Always." Years later, when our children had children of their own, they'd ask us to tell the story of how we met. We'd gather them on this same porch, 3 generations of Keatons, and we'd tell them about an auction block and a debt that became a blessing. We'd tell them about courage and corruption, about standing up for what's right even when the cost seems too high. We'd tell them about the long road from Denver and the courtroom where truth prevailed against all odds. But most of all, we'd tell them about love. The kind of love that doesn't come easy or cheap, that requires sacrifice and strength and the willingness to keep choosing each other through every storm. The kind of love that transforms a business transaction into a sacred covenant, that turns strangers into soulmates, that proves over and over that some debts are best paid not with gold, but with forever. And as the sun would set over the mountains, and the children would finally drift off to sleep, full of stories and dreams, Jonas and I would remain on the porch, our hands clasped, our hearts full, living proof that sometimes, just sometimes, the world grants us fairy tales disguised as everyday miracles. We'd won our fight for justice all those years ago, but the real victory, the one that mattered most, was the life we'd built in the aftermath. The children who called this valley home, the love that had deepened with each passing year, the community we'd helped build, where people stood up for each other and cruelty couldn't take root, Silas Boone had tried to buy and sell human dignity, to reduce people to commodities and transactions. But Jonas had shown a different way, that true wealth wasn't measured in gold, but in the lives you touched, the love you gave, the family you built from broken pieces. And every evening, as I sat on that porch with my husband's hand in mine and our legacy sleeping safely inside, I gave thanks for the day I was sold as a bride of debt, and a cowboy said he'd pay it with forever. Because that forever turned out to be more beautiful than any price tag could capture, more valuable than all the gold in Colorado, and more precious than anything else this wild, wonderful world had to offer. We were home. We were loved. We were free. And that, more than anything else, was worth everything.